Thank you, sir. Um, The proposed operating budget for the fiscal year 2015 is hereby submitted and transmitted to the City Council for your review. I'll start by going through our operating funds and would entertain, if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, that as I'm going through, if you want to be interactive, or do you prefer to wait until I'm done to ask questions? But I'm perfectly happy with you all just hopping in and hanging on as we go and asking questions as you feel appropriate. I have all the materials here for presentation to you all, and then once I run out of these, that's why we have the file cabinets in here. I'll be starting in that direction. The budget is in compliance with the city charter and state statute in that it is a balanced budget. Balanced budget means that we cannot exceed the revenues that are received during the year plus the available fund balance after the 20% reserve. The budget is prepared, as always, based on a zero-based budget analysis. That means that we do take historical context as each of the departments comes in and presents their budget. We take historical context, what we've spent in the years past, what we think where that pattern leads us, and then, but we do look at each line item separately, and the department heads are very good about justifying their line items and why they need each line item the amount that they're going to put in there each year. So we don't just take a line item, add a percentage to it, and present that to you. I think you all have the budget in brief as well as the budget. We'll be starting with the general operating fund, which in the budget in brief, if you're a chart person, is on page 12. If you're a reading person, of course, we'll be starting on page 2 of the transmittal letter. To get to any year's beginning budget, we kind of have to look, we have to trickle backwards, if you will. We have to find out where we were originally projecting the 13 budget to end, how we're doing this year, in the current year, to get to a beginning balance for 14. So on page 2 of your budget, you'll note that we had projected a deficit balance last year of $1,422,657. That was a controlled spin down because we had budgeted out $1 million in 13 to go to the building and equipment replacement fund. That deficit actually was less than we thought it was going to be. It was only $1,373,48. And then revenues for 2014 actually came in higher than were projected at $343,247, 3.91% higher. And that was primarily due to sales taxes being approximately $107,000 higher, and fees and permits. Of course, we only budget, as we're doing this year, for 50 home starts. We were considerably higher than that, so fees and permits came in at $205,956 higher than we thought. Expenditures were $246,221 less than we thought that they were going to be, 2.84% less. The combination of the lower deficit that we had in 13, along with lower expenditures and higher revenues, led to a final balance of $3,339,296, which was $641,778 more than budgeted, which meant that our starting balance for 14, the actual starting balance, was $641,000 higher than we had projected it was going to be. The revenues then for 2015 that we're looking at, I want to start with our property taxes. Property taxes are expected to increase minimally in 2015. We're proposing only a $4,951 increase. A couple of reasons for that. As you know, it's always, for the past several years, it's been the council's desire that we hold the property tax rate, as you voted on last Monday night, at an equal level, 1.3068 overall. And then if you could turn in your budget in brief to page 25, I want to point out something of an anomaly that continues to happen here. Where you see the property tax rates on here, in even years, we have always only experienced growth that added to our assessed valuation. In odd years, the assessor's office reassesses property values and we have growth. So for 20 years, you would experience, when we were growing real fast, you would see in the assessment year when they had assessed values going up and growth, you would see huge increases, 17, 18%. In the growth only years, we were seeing 6 to 7%. What you see on this chart is a reversal of that. In the years where we have growth, the 7.44%, the 1.1%, 2.63, 2.05 are all higher than our assessment year that follows. Kind of a odd thing, it is literally reversed on itself. Reason for this is assessed values are actually, when the assessor is going through, he is actually turning our assessed values backwards. They're going down compared to previous years, and in some of these years, enough to negate the growth. There's another item that adds to that, and it's the reason that in 2014, we actually ended up, if you go back to the general fund chart, you will see that in 2014, we're actually projecting that property taxes will be down from budget, which is pretty unheard of since we know what the budget is going, I mean, it's pretty dead certain what you're going to be getting. Reason for that is that in 2014, two of our larger businesses protested their taxes, their personal property taxes, and they tend to alternate between personal property taxes and their real property taxes. That amount was actually enough to negate the growth that we received in assessed valuation on our residential homes. So our budget is actually coming in a little bit down in 2014 on property taxes. Franchise taxes for 2015 are projected to come in at $32,000, which is about a 1.32% decrease from what we budgeted in 2014. Reason for this is, and we're trying to figure this out now, we're actually losing franchise tax in our wireless communications. For years, what we saw was the franchise tax for wireless was going up while the franchise tax for wired communications was going down. Suddenly, two of the bigger carriers were not getting the same collections. We do not know why. Belton is experiencing the same thing. Sales tax, we expect for 2015 to be about 4.71% higher. City sales tax component of that is about 0.63%. We are not budgeting for any new commercial growth, just a slight growth in the amount of spending with existing businesses. The other reason for the increase is a 6.05% in state vehicle sales tax. You may have all at different meetings heard about recent legislation that is going on. The governor has vetoed sales tax exemptions for certain businesses and types of businesses in Missouri. The veto is subject to an override this fall. The governor's office has used some very, very large numbers as far as local loss of sales tax. For Raymore, it was actually over $700,000. The reason that we have not budgeted for that is because I can't prove those numbers up. There's a great deal of debate as to whether or not they were very, very inflated. I don't think that the veto override is going to go through, so we budgeted normal numbers in here and would have probably stayed the same anyway because, again, I can't find where we would actually be losing those sales taxes. Fees and permits for 2014, substantially more housing starts than what we had projected. Again, we projected only 50 housing starts. we're going to be up in the 70 to 80 range. So 2014 is going to end about 205,956 higher than what we had budgeted. That's a 202% increase over budget. The staff continues until we see a very, very solid 5-year pattern. We're going to continue to hold that line at 50 housing starts, 50 to 55 housing starts. So you see the budget for 2015 actually considerably lower than what we're projecting 2014 to end. Municipal court.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
How many years has it been above 50? Is this the first, second, third? Just curious. Do you know off the top of your head?
Jim, about 3 years now? About 5 years? About 5 years now.
Greatly above 50 or barely above 50?
I think we had 60, but it's crept up into the 70 to 80 range now. Yeah. So very conservative budgeting. Municipal court, another area where we're conservatively budgeting. The 2014 receipts were projected to come in significantly above budget, 86,312, or a little over 20% above what we had budgeted for. We continue to budget conservatively there, but I did creep it up a little bit higher because we've seen that pattern now for a number of years where they're coming in a lot higher. You can see that on the municipal court page under the revenues in back of the transmittal letter. As usual, we have the same 4 transfers using the same exact formula that we always do. Transfer in from the transportation fund to account for transportation costs, primarily salaries in our streets budget. Transfer from the stormwater sales tax fund using the same formula that we always do for the same reason. Transfer from the enterprise fund using the same formula, and that amount is $727,606. That in essence pays for the administrative costs that are associated with the with running the water and sewer departments. The entire general fund bears the cost right now of, for instance, our utility clerks, but we need to be paying for those out of the fund that they are serving. And then the capital project administration cost, this is down considerably. This is the transfer into the general fund for when our engineering department actually does the administration and the inspection of a project. Those types of projects are down this year, so that transfer amount has been reduced to $17,000 for 2015. On to expenses within the general fund. Compensation and benefits. I did budget a 2.5% increase in overall employee salaries. That includes bringing on new employees, the increases that employees would be receiving this year based on their evaluations. The salary chart that is in the budget has been increased by 1.5%. The 1.5% is the amount that was certified by the state auditor's office as the CPI that is used for tax purposes and for our property tax levy. And that's the same way we tied it to that last year as well. The increases for employees that are proposed for this year are we have 4 levels of performance evaluation. You either do not meet expectations, you are satisfactory but need improvement in some areas, you meet expectations, or you exceed expectations. If you are not meeting expectations this year, I propose no increase for those employees. We will be helping them look for a job elsewhere. The employees who are satisfactory but need improvement in some areas will make the COLA. Again, the chart increases by 1.5%. They'll make 1.5%. Employees who meet expectations will receive a 2.5% increase. They will move through the salary chart range by 1%. The employees who exceed expectations in all areas will receive a 3.5% increase, and they will move through the salary chart by 2%. Health insurance costs. We are budgeting a 15% increase in health insurance costs. We are seeing considerably higher increases than that amount in some of the other cities. Our broker, Hake Insurance, continues to assure us that 15% would be the high end. They are hoping for single digits. This is always a real conundrum for us. We don't actually receive the final quotes. I think we're supposed to receive the final quotes September 2nd. September 2nd. The way that they do this is the carrier that you're with gets final call. It's not the purest of bidding situations, even though we bid it out every single year. All the other insurance carriers have to turn in based on the pro forma that you're sending them and your experience mods, et cetera. They have to turn in their quotes, and then in our case, Blue Cross Blue Shield gets one final chance to turn in a quote against those. And that's the way that particular industry works. Blue Cross Blue Shield has indicated that they are going to, none of the quotes that have been turned in are competitive. I can tell you that much. So we'll probably be staying with Blue Cross Blue Shield. However, our entire plan structure, as we had indicated to the council last year, will be changing, and the employees are aware of that. All of the carriers are either pricing out of competition or eliminating completely their HMO programs. The only programs they are offering are the programs that have to be offered on the market, the new health care initiative market. So what they did is they plugged our employees into, they basically did a mirroring, as they call it, which plan is the closest to what our employees currently have. And there will be 5 plans offered, including one very, very high deductible plan. We originally had one employee who was taking advantage of the high deductible plan. The high deductible plans within the new market are actually a lot more attractive than what they were offering before, when you could actually get an HMO. So we do think that some of our employees will take advantage of that, cheaper to the employee and cheaper to the city. So we'll have to see, but they do think that they may be able to get this 15% down into the single digits. We won't know until September. For right now, conservatively budgeting at 15%. The other 2 items that I do want to bring to the council's attention is, it is staff's intention that during the course of this year, we are going to be looking at the structure of the salary chart as it exists. We have classifications and we have ranges. There are different ways to look at a salary chart. Some of you may be aware there are salary charts that have ranges, and there are salary charts that have steps. We're going to be looking at the advantages and disadvantages between the 2 of those and performing an internal study on that. You may see some changes. We're also going to be looking at our performance measurement system that we have. We went to, several years ago, using an employee committee, we went to what I would describe as something of a more subjective performance measurement system. We're going to be looking at that as well to see if we can bring some objectivity to making those grades. Any questions on employee compensations?
We've got good employees and we want to keep them, I understand that. But when we talk about a salary increase and your benefits, those together equal the compensation that the employee gets. When the benefits go up so high, should we not keep the salary at the same level so that we don't price ourselves out of the market? Because we don't know what kind of revenues we're going to keep having. We have to be responsible to the citizens for, good management. And so that's the question that I've always had, even when I was working. At what level can you raise salaries and raise benefits? Do you have to sometimes, in the same way that we're talking about other things where the auditor comes in and they adjust it, raised? Can we do that on this, or is it even wise to do it? Am I coming across, do you understand what I mean?
I think the important thing is to be at market with both. We have to stay competitive. The first thing, obviously, the employees look at, especially the younger employees, is their salary. They don't so much, they don't worry about their benefits the way they should. As long as we can keep a healthy budget and stay within the, but those are things that would have to be looked at, and they are looked at in tandem. When we have to budget 15% for increases, I get a sheet from Cindy Watson, our finance director, about once a month. Actually, it's about once every 3 weeks. I call it the Watson, and it's an overall benefit salary sheet that gives me a final number that we can plug in for employee salary and benefits, and they are looked at in tandem. So yes, that balancing, but we have to make sure the 1.5% increase in the overall chart is very important, because that's our market. That's our competitive market that we have to look at. But then we also have to recognize that employees have an expectation that they're going to move through that chart and eventually have some degree of hope that they're going to get to the top of it. So employee increases are important. They do have to be balanced with the amount that we are spending on benefits, because that we're stuck with. We have no flexibility on that. We have to provide the benefits, but the salaries are important as well. So they'll always be looked at in tandem, but we'll always want to drive the employees into the market and keep them competitive in the market situation.
Do we ever get to the place to where the cost is greater than the benefit of the position?
If we weren't running lean, and again, we still have under 100 real employees. If we weren't, for a city of 20,000 people, if we weren't running that lean, we might have positions that were, positions like that you have to look at and say, do we even need the position? Not how much you're paying, but we're not in that situation.
Jim, of the 15% that we're budgeting, is that the percentage that is actually going to be borne by the city, or is that just the increase that our broker is telling us that we can expect to see? And then how much of that is passed off to the employee, especially if they have family coverage?
That would be an overall increase in the actual premium that we are paying. We're approximately 80-20, not an unusual split in a city situation or a public situation. So of the premium increase, but again, the city would be seeing overall still that pure 15%. The employees would see the same thing in their component of the premium. And certainly a lot of cities, one of the first things that they look at, and we did last year, is you change the contribution rates slightly. As far as if the city can't bear it, then last year our single employees, where they didn't have any type of family coverage, bore some of the increase.
Jay, did you have a question?
The bids that we receive on healthcare, are they based at any level at all based on the claims made by our employees?
Oh, absolutely. The bids that are turned in are, they look at your experience mod. 5 years? About 5 years? 5 years experience mod. Unfortunately, when you have under 100 employees, you're considered a small employer. So that is one of the reasons for the delay in getting our quotes. Blue Cross Blue Shield doesn't have to release the experience mod. To the other companies, it is totally based on what we're telling them what we know, and we don't know everything. Blue Cross Blue Shield has all of that information, and yes, it's very impactful,
Okay, thank you.
as well as our demographics, I might add. Some departmental notes as we run through. This budget does propose 2 staffing changes. One of the changes, but not an overall staffing, an FTE increase. It's simply shifting the FTE charges around to more accurately reflect what people are doing or are going to need to be doing. The first one is the administrative assistant who was half-time in community development and half-time in administration, to more accurately reflect the duties of that person, primarily responsible for doing the planning and zoning meetings, taking the minutes there, doing some minor duties associated with community development, but doing a lot more over on the administration side. I determined to move that person to 0.1 FTE out of community development, 0.9 FTE out of administration. It's all still general fund money, but it more accurately reflects the duties. The second person is we are seeing a real need to devote, and it's been recommended that we devote more time to stormwater issues. So one of our engineering technicians is actually being moved to 1 full-time FTE in stormwater. So that reduces, that's a 0.4% increase in stormwater, 0.4% decrease in the engineering department. Any questions on the FTE moves?
Does that affect our 40% that we do to the park and the 40% we do to stormwater? Would that mean then that we should spend more money on stormwater than we have been in that sales tax?
I'll actually get to that in just a second, because we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
Thanks for the segue, though. Just a brief run through on the top. This is largely a maintenance budget. Overall, departmental expenses are proposed to go from a budgeted last year. Is that cutting out? Mr. Mayberry's telling me it's not, but apparently he's in the other room and don't know what that's about. The second I said maintenance budget, it cut out. I don't know what that's about. Overall, we're expected to go from a budgeted in 2014 departmental expense budget that was $8,676,854 to $8,808,411. That's an overall budgeted departmental increase of 1.52% between the 2 years. So very much a maintenance budget, right at COLA, no surprises. The administration department is expected, most of these increases are associated with the increases that we had to plug in for the medical and the increases that we're plugging in for employee salaries. The line item departmental expenses, the department heads were just really outstanding about taking a realistic look at what they were spending, where they didn't need to be spending money, and holding the line on a budget that we recognize that revenues have plateaued for the next couple of years, so we need to be looking at our expenses very, very carefully. The information and an example of that, information technology services, which is usually one of our largest increases, because anytime somebody's needing, we live in a technology age, anytime somebody's needing new technology, it gets plugged into that department to buy. Doesn't matter which department it's coming out of, doesn't come out of the departmental budget, IT bears the cost, and their total increase for next year is only $944. Economic development, again, slight increase associated with personnel costs. Community development actually goes down because of the FTE change over to administration. Engineering actually goes up, actually goes down slightly, and that's due to, we'll get to it here in a minute, but a lot of changes in their VERP transfers. Streets, again, a significant decrease in the VERP contribution is being, because we actually, last year we had to have a sharp increase. You may remember we hadn't been contributing enough for one of the big trucks, so we had to plug that amount in last year, but it comes down to a normal amount this year. So, but that VERP decrease is being slightly offset because I am proposing a paint striper for the streets that we would do ourselves. Mike has indicated that if we purchase the striper, that will allow us to paint completely at least once a year, do touch-up at least once a year. That's compared to right now, we contract it out for about the same price as the striper every 5 years. So that's when the streets are being, that's the cycle the streets are being done on now.
I wholeheartedly support that recommendation. You know, of course, I brought up striping in the past. I actually went out during the rainstorm last night in the dark to check the stripes and just in our test plots there. And when we're talking about dark and the rain, the contrast really doesn't make any difference at that point. The pavement becomes black when it's saturated. You can't see the line. So I think that's a great recommendation. I like that.
I had a question. I want to back up a minute to economic development. In our goal setting, we mentioned that we wanted to see about a business park, which would be under economic development. How do we bring those two together? 'Cause this is a maintenance budget, and we don't have a lot of extra resources in. So how can we meet? You meet your goals, and we meet ours, which is to try to bring in a business park so we can have more people, more businesses come in, probably down by the ramp area, the old and good part. Are we expecting that business park to be done by the developers, or is the city looking to see that we're gonna have to bear some of the cost of that? Or is that out of line?
Well, I'm going to let Gene kind of talk about what's going on down there right now. But obviously, from a city standpoint, you always want to see the developers lead the charge on that.
Okay.
We have had quite a bit of discussions with the Good Ranch because that is the most practical place. It's close to I-44. Infrastructure is in that area about opening a business park. Probably the most critical thing is the extension of Dean Avenue from North Cass down to 195th Street to open up so that you can get somebody in to see where their business will really be. That's an issue we're going to have to address one of these days, the extension of Dean Avenue down to 195th Street, so we can open up that land for future development. Right now with the market the way it is, most of the leads we get right now are for existing buildings. We do a lot of offers to build a suit, but the reason we're getting the interest only in existing buildings is because those are sitting out there empty, and the business knows they can negotiate very hard with those those building owners to get the lease costs down. So we need a little bit of improvement more in the economy, but we need to open up that area so that we can have sites to show when business comes in. But as I said, we've been working with the Good Ranch trying to put something together, and it's kind of an economic number of, it's hard to spend the money when there's so many available buildings across the Midwest that people can negotiate for, but we're working hard on it.
Thank you.
One of the other locations that had originally been proposed for an office park, business park, was just south of the Office Max and Sam's Club, which would be redevelopment project number 4 for Block and Company and the Galleria. Just to kind of give you a preemptive, we have heard from David Block asking something a little bit unusual. That you all know that's a TIF area. You have 10 years from the start of a TIF to propose your redevelopment areas. And so that particular TIF area is going to expire in January of 2015. Not too long to get something going in that business park. So there are examples, and we have David Bushek, our Special Economic Development Council, working on it. There are areas in Missouri where redevelopment projects have actually been brought forward without a prospective client. They basically outline what could happen there. We are going to have to be bringing that to the council in September. It will either be at your September 15th work session, or we may ask you to convene on the fifth Monday of the month. And David is going to be making a presentation to you all on the pros and cons of proposing a redevelopment or approving a redevelopment area for your economic development policy to be placed into there, just so you're all aware. But I would imagine that what Mr. Block is going to be bringing forward is a proposed business park for that area in the future. The police department is largely a maintenance budget this year as well. There are some expansion item requests being approved for there. And then the transfers in the 2014 budget, you may remember the council increased the transfer from the general fund to the park fund by $50,000 to $100,000. You can see the expansion items that I am recommending for approval on the bottom of page 6, and the expansion items that I have decided we didn't need this year for now at the top of page 7. Any questions on the expansion items or the departmental the department expense budgets, or of a general nature? All that being said, then, the fiscal year 2015 ending balance would be, after we have reserved 20% of the operating expenditures as is council's policy, that amount would be $1,761,682. Leaves a net unrestricted fund balance of $1,586,373. That amount is available for the council to make determinations on what and if you would like to do anything with those. As always, staff recommends that expenditures out of that available fund balance be either one-time expenditures or short program expenditures. You know, a $45,000 expenditure over a 3-year period that then goes away. But otherwise, if you get into too much recurring cost expenditure, that will evaporate very, very quickly.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Jim, in expansion items G on page 7, Kabuto finish mower, and that's designated for streets. I guess I'm kind of confused. Why would streets need that more than parks and recreation, I guess? Can you explain that?
I can, but I'm going to let Mike talk because he's going to be talking a lot later, and I need him to clear his throat.
Thank you. Our streets department is responsible for roadside mowing. We also use that and share it with our utility or enterprise fund for mowing our lift stations and the water storage facilities. So we have quite a bit of roadside mowing that we use that for, and we've got one that's the existing mower is approaching the end of its service life, and that's why we made the request for a finish mower this year.
Okay, that you just raised another question. If we're using that for lift stations and such like that, this is classified as a finish mower. What's the difference between a finish mower and a mower that would not need such a finished cut, you know what I mean? Because in my mind, going through here is, you know, down in the lift station, there's probably the closest road around there's behind trees and everything else, and barely be able to see. I guess where I'm getting at, is this more of a precision type manicured mower than what is needed for an area that really isn't that big of a concern for aesthetics and looks and manicure?
Well, we don't, the Owen Good, you're right, the Owen Good is in a remote area, but we also have to mow around the water tower, which is adjacent to Foxwood Springs, which is kind of a residential area, and so we maintain it to turf grass standard, the Kentucky Reservoir, and for the most part, you know, there is a lot of roadside mowing that we do mow to a turf grass standard. You know, we're mowing adjacent to 58 Highway that needs more of a manicured look. So this is the typical ride-on, you know, 52 or 60-inch deck commercial mower.
Well, and just to clarify my thinking, these are items that were not included in the budget, but are things that we can consider with undesignated fund balance, or is this going to be coming to us in a different budget, you know, maybe next year?
Traditionally, these items will come to you next year. They tend to resurface year after year. An example, the divider curtain for the council room, that's the first item, which would allow us to turn this into 2 rooms here, which they amusingly call my curtain, because I was the first person to, but you'll notice it's been moved out of administration, and since I was in charge of the budget this year, I gave it to Jim Mayberry. There's no administration expansion request. It's perfect. Something like that, I think this is the 4th year for that being in here. So yes, they do tend to recycle themselves, but they are absolutely available. These are all, as you can see, one-time purchases. There may be some maintenance associated with some of the software in later years, but yes, these are all one-time purchases and the sort of thing that the council could certainly look at.
Do we buy American wherever we can? I'm going to say some of these names don't sound very American to me, and I think the companies are all overseas. So I was just trying to figure out, do we buy American whenever we can?
This will sound bad. We buy the best whenever we can so that the taxpayers are getting the best piece of equipment for their money. That for the first time this year, and I know it's a paltry sum, but I did not zero out the budget. There's actually $8,758 sitting in surplus revenue, which would also be added to that final fund balance that the council could spend. Basically, with this, you could spend another $87.58 and still have a zero-based budget, revenue to expenditures. Any questions on the general fund?
I don't know whether this is time to bring it up or not, but in our goal setting, we wanted to have public art, and we wanted a budget to be set for public art, and it was this, I don't know how much money we're talking about for public art, but that was one of the goals that the city council had, and so I wanted to bring it up to see if that is something that we could put in our budget. I don't know whether we're talking 25,000 or 100,000 maximum or what, but that was just, again, that was one of the council goals, and I wanted to bring it up.
In September, before the final budget, at the work session, we intend to bring to the city council the Arts Commission and the public art component of that, and by then you will have had the Civic Center feasibility study in front of you, and so all of those, we felt that all of those would factor in very, very well as far as a budget discussion on do you want to fund an arts commission? Do you want to give them the money? How does the public art component figure into that? and give staff direction on how you wanted that to hit the budget during that meeting. With no other questions, I'll move on to the park fund then. Park fund, again, largely a maintenance budget. They, as in each year past, the acting city manager / city manager takes what the park board gives him, and as long as it is a balanced budget to revenues and expenditures, I believe one year they did use some fund balance in there, which still meets the technical definition. But this year it is a balanced budget, revenues to expenditures. As long as it exists in that state, then it has been the council directive to simply have it passed on to you with no changes. The park board revenues are kind of an interesting structure. If you, Janet used to use the old bubble diagram, remember? I'm more of a chart person. They're basically divided into thirds with the exception of the general fund transfer in. There's a third of their revenue comes from the park levy, a third of their revenue comes from programs, concessions, and the recreation programs that are actually offered, and a third comes from the transfer in from the park sales tax. Their overall revenue budget proposed for 2015 is $1,154,836. The expenditures, again, the primary increases in their expenditures are associated with the personnel costs and we simply apply the same personnel cost to the park fund that we apply to all of the other employees of the city. The expenditures in this particular case, if you're looking really, really carefully at the chart for the park fund, you will note that there has been a redistribution, just like the FTEs in the general fund. There has been a redistribution of the amounts between recreation and parks. Recreation has been increased slightly by the same amount that parks has gone down in personnel costs, again, to more accurately reflect where we're actually paying the people out of. We didn't actually have to change FTEs, we just had to change the dollar amounts in this case. Any questions relative to the park fund?
I have a question regarding the fund balance at the end of the year. So is there unrestricted fund balance $300,000?
That is correct, sir.
So we've given them an extra 50,000 from last year and this year, and then they're going to end up with an extra $300,000 in undesignated fund balance. Is that correct?
Proposed at the end of next year, that's correct, sir.
Why do we do that?
Within that, they are actually, I do know that the park board is looking at a number of projects that are going to be done that could very possibly, and they're going to be amendments within the year. They just haven't, those projects haven't been fully funded out yet, and they were looking at making transfers, either reducing the park sales tax transfer, that's the $350,000 associated with that, which would reduce this fund balance here, or actually pay for portions of those capital projects out of the park fund. But I'll let John Kennedy speak to that if he can.
All right. Well, I guess one of my challenges that I have is that, 2013-14, our adopted budget showed a fund balance of $261,000 left over, and then the actual was $303,000. So the $50,000 that we transferred in ended up as undesignated fund balance. So and I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get in.
We're going to be meeting with the park board, and so we'll have some discussions. But something that's been going on through my mind for the past year is I would like to see the park board tighten up. I don't believe that buildings and grounds should be in there. I think they should be under another situation. And I think that we ought to see about getting a levy increase, because the park board should be able to pay for itself and not have to come into the city council for funds. And so maybe for the April election, we might try to see a small increase, maybe 1 or 2 cents, to see if the people wouldn't support that. I don't know, but that's something that I've been thinking along those lines, because we're giving more responsibility to the park board, like with the Hawk Ridge Park and all, but we're not really giving them any more money to operate on. So that is something that I don't know whether it's the council's responsibility or the park board, or because this is not something that we run by you, because you don't have any control over the park board. But it's something that I've been thinking about, and I didn't know when was the time to bring it up. I'm going to bring it up at the park board at joint meeting we have in Monday.
Very good.
Okay. Because there is no way we can increase on our levy. We have an option to go up or down, and we've kept it the same. But on the park, well, we don't have any option on that. It has to stay at that, what's it, 12 cents or whatever it is, doesn't it? We don't have any option of automatically raising it if we want to.
Yes, yes, you could.
We can?
Mhm.
Then,
But again, it has to remain revenue neutral. It's subject to Hancock. Unless the people vote on an increase,
they have
it's subject to the Hancock
pe-
amendment. That's
people
correct.
have to vote on the increase then.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe the last time the levy was proposed to be increased in the park fund, it was associated with building a pool. I think that was both a property tax levy and the park board levy itself being increased, and I don't think that went well. Any other questions on the park fund? Enterprise fund, revenues in the enterprise fund mainly by water and sewer sales. Oh, yes, sir. Sorry. Just putting a pen. Fiscal year 2015 revenues are projected to come in at virtually the same level as 2014, despite an overall decrease in the total rate for that particular year. The reason for that is last year we had an incredibly sharp decrease in the amount of water usage. When we're tracking our volumes, we're actually seeing that. You may remember that. We discussed that when we were talking about the proposed water and sewer rates in the work session on July 7th. That leads us to those rates, and we'll obviously be bringing those to the council next Monday night, the ones that you directed us to bring forward. The 2015 water and sewer use charge reflects an increase in the water and sewer rates. The blended rate is proposed to go up by the 51 cents, 16 cents in water, 35 cents in sewer over 2014 rates. The city's ongoing conversion of meters continues. Someday in the not too distant future, we're hoping to have all the meters changed out, but we do still continue to budget an amount of $79,968 for the new meters. That gets us approximately $300 a year. We anticipate that program to end in 2020. The cost of water from Kansas City Water, they have not changed their mind since the July 7th meeting, unfortunately. It's still going to go up by 5%. Sewer, Little Blue Valley sewer rate is anticipated to go up by 6% next year. Again, that was reflected in the rate model from July 7th. The total payment for 2015 will be $920,104. The connection charge for Middle Big Creek Sewer will remain at $32.50. It was raised to $32.50 last year, the council may remember. In 2015, that will remain the same, and we do not anticipate any new homes in the Middle Big Creek Sewer area, so that charge will remain the same. We simply pay $32.50 a month by the number of connections that we have. Solid waste, you may remember that the council several months ago received a proposal from Town and Country to extend through 2017 the solid waste charges, or the solid waste service for the city. They proposed that in 2015, the rate actually go down to $11.91 per month from the current $12.31 per month that's being paid. And then in 2016 and 2017, we will use the refuse rate index to increase that amount. And it is very easy for staff to double check the numbers that are associated with the refuse rate index, as hard as that might be to believe. Transfers out of the enterprise fund include the $727,606 according to the formula as discussed earlier into the general fund. And then each year we place an amount into the enterprise capital maintenance fund for repairs on existing lines that serve the existing customer base. That transfer for next year is proposed at $234,144. That is a reduction to hold some money in the enterprise, the regular enterprise fund, due to possible liability expenditures that the council may realize during the next couple of years. So we've begun a program for that. That's a kind of a just-in-case holdback. The single expansion item, the expansion item was also realized in stormwater and engineering and streets. Next year, Mike intends to try to bring our Public Works Department the APWA accreditation that Belton has, and we'd like to see that here, and there is a cost associated with applying for that particular accreditation. Any questions concerning the enterprise fund?
Obviously, there's the cost of the basic services of providing water to a resident, sewer, and picking up the trash. And then obviously we have to charge a little on top of that because we have to send out the bills and that kind of thing. Can you give me roughly what the ratio would be? I mean, like what percentage do we charge for what work we have to do on top of the actual delivery? It's probably in here somewhere, but.
In solid waste, we actually do a pass-through.
Wow.
We charge no administrative charge on top of solid waste. Every household next year, starting on January 1, will be charged $11.91, which is exactly what we're paying. It's a pretty easy bill to figure.
That is.
As far as on water and sewer, of course, the model that we use from the July 7th memo is cost of service. And Mike and Cindy and I sit down starting in January because it does impact some of our other numbers, and it's one of the tougher ones to get. And we actually have a water and sewer rate model that we use. Cost of service is all we charge. It fluctuates a little bit from year to year because we may be plugging in a future year, looking down the line, a capital project that wasn't in there in the previous year. That capital project may be 15 years out that we're looking at for existing utility customers. A service line, new water tower, something like all of those impact what today's or next year's cost of service to the customer is going to be, because we have to start saving the money for that or planning for the bond issue for that. How much of that is over and above actually paying for water and sewer charges?
I'm going to either annoy you or give you a break. You've explained it beyond my expectation. Thank you very much. That's great. I was mainly looking for the solid waste.
I was
appreciate
actually
it.
hoping that maybe Cindy was scrambling behind me to reduce the overall enterprise by commodities and water and services, contractual.
No,
and sewer.
that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for letting me off the hook. The debt service fund. It's actually one of those funds that people don't pay a lot of attention to, but we need to be in the year coming up. Debt service is is the 7170 of the levy. It's the majority of the levy that people pay. It's what they pay so that we can have long-term debt, bond issues. In 2015, the city is going to have to make a decision. You may remember when we brought the levy to you last week, we talked about the fact that we could have charged a little bit more in the levy, in the debt service portion. I'm going to add something in here. I'm going to deviate a little bit. Next week when we bring the levy to you, you may remember that when I talked about the levy, I said we really had to push, and I probably should have asked for an emergency reading because we were running up on the back end with both the state auditor's office and the county. The state auditor's office, based on all the numbers that all the counties sent them when they finally had them, which was last Tuesday, changed the formulary, and we could have actually crept up the other two levies just slightly. Staff would have still recommended the amounts that we gave to the council, but we could have actually caught up a little bit more in both of those levies. And I'll be bringing that explanation to you next Monday night. We still would have been recommending keeping the levy at the overall 1.3068 because the amounts were very, very minor, but did want to let you know that the state auditor's office had changed the formulary based on what they received from the county numbers at the very last. In fact, we think they changed it this past Tuesday. I was going to let you know at the end of this, but this seems like a good time to bring that in. The debt service levy did not change the ceiling that we could have charged, and you may remember that it was about 3 cents above the 7170 that we had in there. That amount last year was 92.40 cents that we could have charged in the debt service portion of the levy. That because we refunded those, had those very, very favorable refundings, and because we're paying off a bond issue at the end of this year, that amount went from that 92.40 down to about 74 cents that we could charge in the debt service levy. Next year, that would actually go below the 7170, so we need to make a decision on, we either have to reduce the 7170 and we will not be able to capture it again. We have to go for a no tax increase bond issue, which has been a great deal of discussion, or we have to make a decision on whether to defease some of our existing bond structure for a couple of years, the kick the can down the road scenario that we talked about earlier, and try to hold off until we make a decision on what we would do with a no tax increase bond issue. Any questions on the debt service fund overall? As far as the internal service funds are concerned, they are on page 285 and 288 of the budget if you prefer to follow along with the chart rather than the written word. The two internal service funds are the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund and the Restricted Revenue Fund. We are philosophically, I am proposing a philosophical change in the verb that primarily impacts page 285 for the verb fund, I believe. Oh yeah, I have the I have the encode detail in mind, so it's going to be a slightly different page. Hang on just one second. Do they have the index, Cindy? Okay, great. 203? Great. Yeah.
The 207.
207? Thank you. What we propose this year is that we reduce in the police department the length of time, that we increase the length of time that we hold on to vehicles. This has been a lengthy discussion with the chief, our fleet manager, Ms. Watson, and myself. The police cars were being turned over originally. The patrol vehicles themselves were at 3 years, and the administrative vehicles were at 6 years. We're proposing to move those out by 1 year. It is a substantial savings. We're doing that for a couple of different reasons. We were seeing really large trade-in amounts being given for the vehicles that weren't being reduced that much by extending out by a year. Some of our patrol vehicles, we were getting $6,500, $7,000 on a trade-in when we were turning them back. That was too much. Holding them out for another year, that amount is going down to about $4,000 to $5,000, but we're not realizing that amount in maintenance. So a considerable savings. The 1 year out for a fleet that is our largest fleet, when you take that across all of the vehicles, is a substantial savings in the general fund of what we're having to transfer into the road fund each year. We're actually implementing the fund as far as purchase of vehicles and trade-in of vehicles, not immediately. We're waiting 2 years, which is why you still see a considerable number of police vehicles on here to be replaced out next year on the chart that you're looking at. But it does allow us for all the rest of the fleet to start pushing that out. Any questions on that? Oh, the second point of philosophy within the VERT fund, we do intend to decrease the amount of time before we replace the big snow plows. They were breaking down. The maintenance charges on them are huge. So we're reducing from 10 and beyond for the snow plows down to a hard 5. If any of you remember the last big snowstorm we had, one of our big snow plows spent all of its time in the side parking lot at Willow Wind Shopping Center, where we were trying to get it either towed out or get it repaired in place. That was happening with a lot of them. Back in the shop a lot during the events. So we really felt that it would be best to move that back to 5, not necessarily from a cost standpoint, but from a let's get some iron on the streets when we really need it standpoint. Any questions on those two? Great. The restricted revenue fund is just behind that one. I won't give a page number. Thank you. One of the significant, obviously now in the restricted revenue fund, you do see a considerable amount of money in there which was restricted last year for the Civic Center, the $1 million. One of the other items that's in there of note is budgeted in 2013, we thought that we were going to spend the entirety of the 911 tax on the remodel that went on downstairs. The remodel came in cheaper than we thought it was going to, which left $93,840. We're simply going to spin that down on appropriate 911 expenditures until that hits a zero base, and then both that particular source of revenue and the expenditures associated with it will go away forever, because the 911 sales tax took its place. Any questions on the restricted revenue fund? Of one other note, in addition to the $1 million for the Civic Center that's in the restricted revenue fund, and this will give me a quick chance to segue into the capital funds unless somebody has any operating fund questions. Great. Just a quick note in the capital fund. If you could turn to the capital improvement fund in there, which I hesitate to even give a page number. Thank you. page 250. In the column on the page that is 2011, 2012, as you look down that really small print that's going to make me put my glasses on, you will note the last item in the yellow, which is the projects. You see a $200,000 project for an activity center that reduces that fund balance by $200,000. That actually, for those of you who were on the council at the time, in the year that we presented in 11-12, at the last budget, or at the last reading of the budget in October, $200,000 that had been dedicated to the Eagle Glen Trail project was removed from the Eagle Glen Trail project and put into some form of a future activity center. The reason for that was that was the year that 3 additional officers were proposed, as well as the remodel downstairs for $400,000. And Councilmember Cox made the motion, and it was seconded, and within the motion, he indicated that because he recognized that putting in the new dispatch center and remodeling downstairs would mean the loss of the community room there, that we needed to plant some seed money for a future activity center. So that $200,000 was moved from accelerating the Eagle Glen Trail, which is now being done this year, to actually being placed in for a future activity center in that year, and the final budget workup included that wording. So the council does not have, the essence of that is the council has $1,200,000, not $1 million, set aside for a future activity center of some sort or civic center of some sort. Any questions on that? Great. Back to the beginning then of the capital funds. Would you all like to take a break, or do you just want me to push on? A couple of general overviews relative to the capital funds for this year. I am proposing, and I've talked with some of you about this in our ward meetings, I am proposing a major change in the philosophy of the excise tax and the use of the excise tax. Up to now, the excise tax has been used solely for building new roads. The wording of the ballot language and the wording within the code for the excise tax allows the excise tax to be used for, the wording in the ballot language was, it is to be used for streets, period. The wording in the code that was associated with the ballot says it can be used for construction of streets, reconstruction of streets, major maintenance of streets, and street improvements. It would be my proposal to deviate from past practice and use the excise tax for maintenance of major thoroughfares within the city. Prior to this year, we had a 4-year program for maintenance of major thoroughfares that had been budgeted into the transportation fund. It would be my proposal, and you'll see it within the budget here, that 4 years of major maintenance on thoroughfare routes be moved into the excise tax fund. It still leaves a healthy balance in the excise tax fund should we make a determination that we needed some new street segments. Currently there are no new street segments proposed within the 10-year road plan. As Gene indicated, at some point there may need to be a consideration of the extension of Dean Avenue just slightly farther south, but that has not been determined yet. but there would be enough money in the excise tax fund to still fund that and then still have a balance. So that would be my proposal for that particular program. That frees up in the transportation fund enough to allow us to plug an additional $150,000 into streets and roads each year for at least the next 4 years, and then plug $100,000 into doing additional curbs. In addition to that particular change, it would be my recommendation to the council, because of need, that we go from, you'll remember that within the park stormwater sales tax, 40% of the revenue associated with that goes to parks, 40% goes to stormwater, 20% is at the council's discretion. Last year, the entire 20% was dedicated to parks. For a couple of years before that, it was a 50-50 split. I am recommending that we go back to a 50-50 split between parks and stormwater, and that the additional, I believe that generates an additional $109,000 in stormwater. It would be my recommendation that $100,000 of that, we recognize the fact that curbs are, in addition to being a street improvement, are a stormwater conveyance measure. And so we dedicate $100,000 of stormwater to also improving curbs. That would mean that in normal years, not next year, because I'll get to that, because we had the June work session where, well, I can get to it now, as a matter of fact. We had the June work session where the council determined we would put on hold the street preservation program and the streets that we had programmed for 2015, and we would go with the $843,000 plan that got some of our poor roads up, that got Johnson Drive done, that got Lucy Webb done going east, and what other street line? There was one more.
Oh, there was a number of local roads
A
included
number
in
of
that as
local
well.
roads within that. So it would allow for next year and for at least 4 years beyond another $150,000 into that program, which means next year we would be able to program just shy of $1 million worth of streets between the sheet that we handed you all and the additional $150,000. In addition to that, I've had Mike work up, because at that meeting we had the discussion about what if we did throw 150 or 300,000 additional each year at the Poor Streets program or the street preservation program as it existed, to try to at least shift a little bit, turn that dial on that pie chart to get some of the streets out of poor condition, or even worse, completely failed condition. So this does allow us on a regular basis to give at least $150,000 to the program and an additional $200,000 to the curb program to get $500,000 worth of curbs done each year. And so those are the major changes that I'm proposing within the capital program. And before we kind of get into the details of each of the funds that are associated with it, if you'd have any questions on that. Terrific. We do anticipate that revenues into the capital funds are going to be pretty constant. The entirety of those funds that are associated with the sales taxes into the capital funds that would be associated with the Sam's Club coming on. Sam's Club came on, our first sales taxes realized from Sam's Club were in November of last year. So we will realize an entire year of those revenues, and those are of course projected in the 2014 budget for each of these, but there will be no increase. As we said, we're not currently planning on any other commercial to come in. We are planning on the 50 housing starts, and those are the only additional revenues that you currently see in the capital funds that are associated with the sales tax. Because it's 50 housing starts, of course, some of these funds do realize water connection fees and sewer connection fees, same sort of an increase associated with that. we do not propose this year to increase either water or sewer connection fees. Within the, again, as we discussed, it is our recommendation that it be a 50-50 split between the park and stormwater sales tax allocation. As far as projects that are being programmed in the capital fund, again, the first year of the 5-year CIP is the capital fund. Then we have the out years where some of the projects are actually funded and some are unfunded within there. The reason we put the funded projects in is we feel that those particular projects carry a higher priority. Either the council or staff has felt that they need to be done within those years, and we need to make sure that funding exists to take care of those projects. And then there is still some fund balance left there for the lower priority unfunded projects that you see at the very back of the CIP and this particular, the transmittal letter. From a buildings and grounds standpoint, the projects that are associated are the City Hall tower stabilization. We haven't seen it leaning anymore, but we do know based on the study that was done that that would be inevitable if we don't do some sort of mud jacking and stabilization and piering on that particular tower. The fiber optic cable installation for the park maintenance facility will turn us from telephone lines into being internet capable, but we have to bring the line from down on Madison up to the park maintenance facility. That's the project associated with that. The City Hall South Police Department sidewalk has deteriorated very, very badly. As we replace it, it's going to be our intention to dip it in a little bit more. If you've been back there, you know that it does have a curl to it. We're going to increase the curl, decrease the amount of sidewalk that is back there to allow for police vehicles to slide in there on a temporary basis when they're coming in off call. City Hall voicemail system replacement. The phone system that exists here has a software component to it that handles the voicemail. The software is out of date, like any software gets. We're having to replace that in the the phone system was listed in the Building and Equipment Replacement Fund, so that's included as well. The park maintenance facility, the air conditioner needs to be replaced. It's costing us more every single year to get it repaired than the $7,000 to get it replaced. Within parks, the recreation park basketball court restoration has bubbled into the year. It was actually in the out years and has been for several years. It is slated to be repaired this year. Farmers Market Park Development Phase 1B. You will remember that last year in the Capital Improvement Fund, we dedicated $150,000. You all saw the plan in work session that was being proposed by the Parks Department and Engineering. The plan called for Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 1, the 150 could get about half of it done, but did not include a pavilion and some of the flat work that needed to be done. It would be my proposal that we give the final 150 out of the Capital Improvement Fund to complete Phase 1 of the Farmers Market. Recreation Park baseball fields, this was a 4-year program at $75,000 each year. Last year was the first $75,000 associated with it. The $75,000 for the second year of it has simply been moved in. I believe that it is John's intention to actually combine the two $75,000 projects and do 2 of the fields at once so that we get 2 of the fields down and back up all at the same time, rather than drawing it out into busting up a field in each of 4 years. It reduces the amount of downtime. We will also realize some economies of scale by pushing the 2 projects together. Sanitary sewer inflow and infiltration, the program continues for $124,455 this year. We will continue to focus our efforts on the subdivisions that are south of Lucy Webb Road and west of Madison. Again, the annual the annual curb replacement is now within there for $100,000. and it's also the first project listed in the transportation fund for $400,000. We believe that with the $500,000, we should be able to get over 20,000 feet of curb done next year. The annual street preservation program, again, last year, we had brought to you in June $843,000 worth of streets. It is proposed that we add an additional $150,000 to that particular program and get $993,131 done within that. And with the council's okay, I'm going to turn this over to Mike to talk about what that 150,000, the additional 150,000 will do to the program, in addition to dedicating an additional, if the council would so choose. We had been directed by the council, I believe yourself, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, what would happen if we gave another 150,000 to it each year.
Before you turn over to Mike, back on the curb replacement, by adding the extra money to it, you know, we were looking at multi-year replacement, you know, and some of them looked like we weren't going to get to for 4 or 5 years. How much does that accelerate that time frame?
I believe that the original program called for the need to replace $3 million in total worth of curb. Now going to $500,000 a year, we're looking at a 6-year program versus multi-year was going to be about 10 to 12 years is what it was going to end up being. So we accelerate that into a shorter period, and hopefully then we free up some of the money. One of the other interesting things that you may note within the transportation fund is the sidewalk program actually is anticipated within this CIP period now to drop off. So we would also be saving $117,000 that we've been paying each year on the sidewalk program at about the same time. Go ahead, Mike.
As Jim explained to you, or what you have before you are 3 pie charts, and what we are looking at is pie charts projecting the condition of the road network at the end of the 2020 construction season. The first one represents the condition of the network at the end of, or with a $550,000 budget. The next pie chart represents the proposed budget of $650,000 a year. And as we talked in June, what we're going to kind of start working towards is a more blended project, where we're a program where we're allocating funds to not really major reconstruction, but what we consider reconstruction, which is much more major mill and overlays and subgrade treatments than what we consider routine maintenance of the streets, which is what we had been working on for the past few years. Routine maintenance includes up to 1.5 inch mill and overlay on some streets. This program will start incorporating more subgrade improvements and in some cases full removal of the pavement and replacement. What we discussed at the June work session is that we would start including streets based on traffic flow. So we looked at starting to include our major collectors and minor arterials, and what we have programmed with the $650,000 budget would allow us to work on our mill and overlay North Foxwoods Drive between 58 Highway and 155th Street. That road, there's starting to be a lot of settlements on that road over utility crossings, and it's really beyond a normal, just the microsurface maintenance that we are going to have programmed for the other thoroughfare routes. 195th Street, we can also program in that road. We've started to manifest a lot of patching on that road, similar to what we were doing in Kurzwell and Prairie Lane and Lucy Webb between Madison, or between J and Prairie Lane. We're starting to see allocations of a lot of staff time and expense down there, so this budget will allow us, and the new flexible program, to program that in. Also work on North Madison, north of the Madison Creek subdivision, the area that's still kind of the rural area. And so that would, continuing at that budget level, we project it's probably would be 3 or 4 more years at that funding level before we would start adding in some local roads into the mix, as well as doing reconstruction work on the major thoroughfares. The last pie chart is if we were able to sustain an $800,000 budget. What that does is it accelerates the period of time at which we could start throwing local roads into the mix. It actually, at the end of the 2020 construction program, so for fiscal year 2021, we would be starting to do major work on a mix of the collector streets or the higher traffic roads, and starting to mix in some of the local through routes, not necessarily the cul-de-sacs or the dead ends, but we would start mixing in the local roads.
Any questions from the council on that?
So in the budget is the final one, is that what is proposed for this budget?
No, the middle one is actually what is proposed for this budget, which is to give an additional $150,000 to the program that has been freed up by using the excise tax for major thoroughfare routes. The last pie chart at the 800,000 is to answer the question, if council were to find a way to fund that up by an additional $150,000 a year from another source, how much would that change the existing program?
What source would that be? Do you have a recommendation if that were to happen?
Again, back to the discussion of if you were going to use general fund balance, the general fund could be used for that for short periods of time. If we were looking at one of those short program periods where we said, okay, we want to see what could happen if for the next 3 years we committed to 150 out of general fund balance, that would be the equivalent, because if the balance changed in the next year or we had something go wrong, you're committing to it ostensibly for 1 year. You're not pulling anything aside. Capital improvement fund can be used for that, but it's pretty thin at current. But there is money there, where maybe not the whole 150, but some is there. We are considering in the next couple of years possibly freeing some money up in the capital improvement fund by refunding the bonds that we're paying for out of that fund for the Hubach Hill Road improvements. Those would be my first brush thoughts on available funding for that.
So in order to make the third pie chart reality, we would have to fund it for 5 years of the extra 150,000, which would be 750,000. So we could take half of the undesignated fund balance and pre-fund that if we so chose.
Yes, sir. Any other questions on the transportation fund? Okay. Again, the other items that we're doing out of there are the annual sidewalk program at 117,000, and the maintenance of thoroughfare routes that I discussed earlier, which will be coming out of the excise tax fund. Within the excise tax fund, the first project that is proposed is Lucy Webb going west now. So between what is currently programmed for Lucy, so Lucy Webb is going, one of the projects has Lucy Webb going west, one of the projects has Lucy Webb going east. So the entirety of Lucy Webb from the curve to J Highway will be done within this. And Mike, what's proposed to be done?
This year, we are doing significant patching on Lucy Webb east of Madison Street. Next year, we are proposing to mill and overlay that road. And then the maintenance of the thoroughfare will be microsurfacing and restriping of Lucy Webb Road from Madison Street to somewhere. We did some microsurfacing work on it as part of the roundabout, but basically to the roundabout.
On Lucy Webb, I've driven that a few times in the last several weeks, and it seems like it's undulating with dips and valleys. Is there something going on underneath the surface on Lucy Webb east of Madison that we need to prepare for or take a look at in the future? Because it seems like, and when you drive my car down there, and my car does what it does, it definitely got my attention. Not that, if anything special about my car, but my car doesn't do that. So I'm just wondering if there's something going on underneath the surface that we need to talk about and be prepared for.
I wondered that too, because is the patching going to take care of? I mean, there are some pretty significant dips in Lucy Webb between Madison and Jay. So I'm concerned that just that patching isn't going to solve that problem. At least it seems like it hasn't in the last couple of years.
Well, what we're going to be doing is full depth pad. We'll take all the pavement out and address all the soft material under the road there. And then next year, when we overlay it, we'll put in a leveling course to smooth it out further, and then we'll put a final overlay on it.
Any other questions on that? The last project in the Transportation Fund is the Olive Street sidewalk from Madison to Monroe, being put in with the farmers market and the planned development of the farmers market property. We do need to create some pedestrian infrastructure around that site. Water projects on tap for next year. Work with me. Is the Foxwood Water Tower painting and repair for $400,000 and water main replacement, 500 South Adams Street. That particular project, brand new to the CIP, calls for the replacement of the water main along the 500 block of South Adams Street. Over the past several years, we've had a significant number of water main breaks there. It's clearly reached the end of its useful life. Any questions on the water projects? Any questions on the capital fund for next year as a whole? Great. Projects that are beyond 2015, both funded and unfunded. Again, the funded projects that you see within the chart sheets are because they rise to a level of significance either for the council or staff, and we want to make sure that we have the money to pay for them in the years that they're programmed for. Those projects include changing the video quality here in City Council chambers. That is slated for 2016 at a cost of $60,000. The cameras that we have, that we use for the council meetings. These are actually security cameras. They're not production cameras, and they need to be changed out. Within parks, Memorial Park improvements for 2017 and 2018 at $75,000 apiece. Memorial Park tennis court maintenance for $20,000 in 2016. Recreation Park baseball field renovation projects, the last two $75,000 amounts, which I would imagine, just like the first two, will be combined into one project. Memorial Park playground improvements to help with some handicap accessibility issues relative to that playground structure for $48,000 in 2017. ADA access to the Memorial Park ball fields at $65,000, and the Hawk Ridge Park development $150,000 in 2018, which would allow us to kind of begin to phase in what is a significantly high number for improvements to Hawk Ridge Park, but trying to hit some of the low-hanging fruit associated with that.
Have we really decided what we're gonna do with Hawk Ridge? Are we gonna follow the plan that was submitted? How's that gonna go?
I believe that they're going to do some of the items that were within the plan. I don't know if they're going to be doing them in the order that the plan called for. John, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you. We actually have a grounds meeting this coming Monday before the joint Park Board City Council meeting to discuss the order and what the Park Board feels may be a significant plan for Hawk Ridge Park. So I will have a better answer for you, sir, after the Monday meeting.
Any other questions on the parks? Thank you. Thank you, John. Sanitary sewer, the I&I program will continue as it has. I think for the next couple of years, in fact, we're in those southern subdivisions that are associated with the I&I program. Within transportation, of course, the maintenance of thoroughfare routes will continue for another 3 years. This year, again, Lucy Webb was slated. Next year, this will be 58, that $224,000. Also within there, and we never add it because it's just such a regular program, will be the street preservation program at $650,000, the sidewalks at $117,000, and the curb program at $400,000 out of this program and $500,000 out of stormwater. Within water, the Johnson Drive water main replacement is called for in 2016 at a cost of $270,000. Some future projects, unfunded, again, these are projects that are recognized as important, significant, but not necessarily in need of funding, not necessary to be pushing them forward, or there hasn't been a triggering mechanism to actually have them come in, especially if it's a street. The farmers market property improvements, in addition to what is being paid for out of the capital improvement fund or proposed to be paid for. Recreation Park baseball field irrigation system at $110,000. Trail construction down at Hawk Ridge Park. The Johnson Lake Bank reinforcement. Recreation Park soccer area rehabilitation and irrigation. Southwest Interceptor, which has been on, then off, and on, then off. But right now, because there's no development out there, not necessary. The Sunset Lane extension north of 58 Highway at 840. When Sunset Lane goes north, there will be a component of it that our park bumps up against. So the reason that this is an unfunded is the development necessary to get Sunset Lane up into there has not occurred yet. But for that portion that is against our park, the city has the same financial responsibility for that road that a developer would, because we have developed the park. The North Madison Street improvement, again, this was more of a discussion following the general obligation bond that some of our, by the council itself, that some of our streets, we needed more avenues to get north in the city, so this was plugged in at council request. And 155th Street from Madison to Kentucky, this would only happen if there was a partnership with Kansas City and Grandview to improve that very bad street, and something would need to be done down near 71 Highway. Ward Road reconstruction, 163rd Street from Fox Ridge Drive to Kentucky Road. Staff would hope that that one would come off and be totally development driven. And then a 2.5 million gallon water tower at some point when the city's population calls for it. That concludes the presentation of the capital funds and the CIP. Again, I can't give enough thanks to our department heads, especially this year in the transition year, for all the help they gave me in putting the budget together. Ms. Watson and her team getting the background information that I need, and usually I do a lot of the revenue component of the budget in addition to advising the city manager on this. So it was a little bit, I think a lot of them would acknowledge it was a little bit difficult for me to give some of those things up and trust the numbers that were coming in. And so they've all been terrific. So my sincere thanks to the entire department head and management team for all of their help in putting this together. And staff would entertain any questions you might have on any of this.
Kevin?
Thank you. On page 222, 155th Street, Madison to Kentucky, that unfunded thing, it reminds me of something that I heard, maybe I thought I heard, but I'm sure staff is aware of it if it is true. Is Kansas City and Belton and Grandview working together for, in conjunction together for the western part of 155th? I thought I heard some time back that there was some improvements going to be taken on and with cooperation between those three municipalities. Do you know anything about that?
Mike?
I don't know all of the specific details, but yes, there is a project on the books that is going to improve the interchange at 155th and 49. Improvements west of there, and also Grandview and Belton are working improvements that go east. And I believe the project limits are somewhere close to Kentucky. I don't know if it terminates at Cali or if it comes all the way to Kentucky.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Are there any motions or suggestions by council? Councilmember Kellogg.
I have a question, and it's more for council, and I'll apologize for being late. I was dead asleep and trying to get woke up, but I was here for the most of this, and I appreciate staff's time, and no disrespect by my tardiness by any means. Very well put together. Last Monday night's meeting, we had Mr. Adams come in and ask that we fund one extra day for the Oates bus, and he gave some figures of $2,800 for the total year, and if we fund it from the time of the balance or the budget is passed until the end of the year, it'd be, I think, what he said, $2,400. I haven't seen in the budget where anything is slated for that. I guess I would ask my fellow colleagues here at the tables, I would like to fund that program, for the year. My intention is on a year-to-year basis and reevaluate it each year. I would like to see that in the budget for one extra day, up to $2,800.
Councilmember.
I'd like to hear from our attorney on that, because some information that I have received says that because it is a tax-supported entity itself, that we should be careful about supporting other tax entities, supporting entities. So I would like to know whether we can legally do that or not, because it has nothing to do with whether we're taking care of transportation or not. It is whether it is legally advisable for us to give some of our tax money to another tax agency.
I appreciate that insight. That's the first time I heard of that, but I would have the same concerns too, and I'd welcome those comments. So thank you.
And I myself, you know, my initial objection to the city sponsoring that was the current way that it's structured. The fact that people who actually need the service might get bumped by people who just want to take advantage of the service. So before I could support it, I'd like to see it restructured in a way to where if it's going to be offered, it needs to be a more of a need-based. The current way that it's done now, I can't support that.
I can't imagine that there's a legal issue. Belton pays for a bus, and they've done it for many, many years. So just saying that example tells me that probably there's not, but it wouldn't hurt to check it out. And I'm the one who brought that forward, I don't know, a year or two ago, so I definitely would support that. However, I was looking at that and wondered about Mr. Adams's math, because this budget starts in November, and he said the contract starts in June, and so I don't understand how he came up with those numbers. I'd want to double check those numbers, but I would support putting it in the budget for this year and next.
Councilmember Stevens.
I'm not sure if I support it or not. I already gave money to him myself, so I just think that's where charity should come from, is at the individual, but not necessarily opposed to it.
Councilmember Moorhead.
I have a couple points on this. We discussed this at length last year, and it was widely not supported. One of the concerns that I have for it is a private venture. We have a number of groups that we talked about the slippery slope, where we could run a risk of having, Meals on Wheels next, and then we could have all kinds of other organizations come before us, and all are equally worthy. But the concern that we have is taking private tax dollars of citizens to give to private ventures. We've not really had a good in-depth review of this program. I'm not really trustworthy of the information we've received to date from who has presented it. So we really haven't taken a look at this. And if the ultimate need is to see a public transportation system for citizens in Raymore, I have no problem doing that. I think, one, it should be then controlled by us, and two, it should be offered to everybody instead of the pick and choose method so far. I'm also concerned because when private businesses are saying, hey, why isn't anybody reaching out to us for us to fund this? And we've had recently in this last fiscal year, we've had a very large enterprise move into town saying they'd love to participate in activities like this. And have they been approached? Based on previous work experience with that company, this is something that they might even fully fund without anybody's private support. So there's a lot of question marks here. I hate the idea that we're earmarking money for something that potentially we may not even have to get into the game with. So I would oppose it.
Yes, I think I have some kind of agree with what you're saying, Ms. Moorhead, because once we expand a service that can be handled by private citizens, once we expand that to where it becomes a government-supported thing, we have increased government participation in private lives. And I am not sure that I'm in favor of doing that, increasing government oversight on something, when we have local businesses and individuals that are willing to do it. Does that make sense?
Councilmember Kellogg.
Yes, I believe it does make sense, but I will also add that we somewhat do that, not somewhat, but we already do that in another parallel, and it's called Mark it's coming up, the household waste system. We do fund that. it's based on per capita, and not everybody uses that. I don't see why not, but but that is a service that each and every citizen in Raymore could go out and purchase, and not purchase, but pay for on their own. But we as the city choose to fund that on a per capita ratio basis, and that basically costs us, I think, around $1 per citizen, and we're right at 20,000 in the city. So that's what we're paying, is right around $20,000, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct, Jim?
I think it's pretty close to that, yes. Just under.
And that's my rationale and justification for this, is that, that's the household waste program that we offer, and yes, it's valuable, but is it any more valuable than, getting folks, or having the ability for folks to get to the store to get their weekly and monthly needs? I see a need, but I also like what Mr. Westcoat said too, is that, I would like to see some controls on it, yes, so that way we actually hit those, I don't mean to use that term, but that we actually take care of the need that is there, instead of, having it open-ended for it to be abused.
Councilmember Moorhead.
Well, then to piggyback on that exact statement, then what we're really saying is are we wanting to put money in toward the Oates bus system, or are we wanting to allocate money for the city's addressing public transportation needs, which would then be kept in-house, where we could determine if the Oates bus format in this current format is not meeting the needs that we want, then we can pick and choose whether to put money into that. For example, the household waste program, that's inherently offered to everyone. If people choose not to use it, that's to their discretion. In this particular instance, the current use of the Oates bus system is not offered to everyone. It's offered to a far selected group, and then there's even a waiting list. Again, I have concerns about its application. I mean, I agree. I mean, it does provide a service for people that is in need. That's not the question. The question is when you're driving around town, and I have the convenience of being self-employed, when the bus is sitting there for an hour being unused while 12 people are having lunch at a restaurant, is that really servicing the public need for transportation when that bus could be used otherwise? We would be giving money to a private entity that would therefore use that money in their own discretion, and we would not necessarily directly have the input. I would be more inclined to say we put money aside for public transportation, and then we control the delegation. And we talk about placing controls on it. We can't place controls on it once you write the check. Once the money's gone, they get some discretion on that. The only thing we can do is no longer fund it in the future. I'd rather keep the money in-house. So, and then if the Oates bus wishes to comply with our criteria, then they can be a benefactor of that. But I think I guess metaphorically, the cart would be before the horse if we do the just direct funding of the Oates system as it currently stands.
And I'd also like to add that, I think both projects have merit. The household waste, in theory, keeps the hazardous waste out of our landfills, out of our streams. A lot of people, I can't imagine people doing it, but I'm sure that there have been, would just pour paint down, our sewer system and just down the gutter. So by offering that to everyone, actually everybody does benefit indirectly, because it keeps those things, just out of the normal system. Councilmember Stevens.
I'm not sure I'd really be for a public system. It just seems like that would be an expansion and even more money, so I'm not sure I'd be for that either.
Councilmember Delgado.
I agree. I don't think that the city wants to get into public transportation at this point. I think that the Oates bus would be an excellent way for us to provide a service that our seniors need. We've been talking over and over and over about how we need to be more friendly to the seniors in our community. I see a lot of value in this. Not to start a huge debate, but it was not greatly opposed. If I remember correctly, it passed on first reading and failed on second reading because we had an absent council member.
You know, one thing we might want to take a look at is what local charities or groups we support and which ones we don't and why we do. Maybe we should take a look at that, and that would help us make decisions on not only the OSPUS but other things that we do. Because after all, remember, we are stewards of the taxpayers' money, and how we spend it. They don't mind us spending it for streets and for things like that that they need to use every day, but they may not want us to spend it on some of these other things that we do. I can remember when Kansas City bought Charlie Parker's was it saxophone for $75,000, and they were allowed to do it because they were a charter city, and they had, and were like us, and they had the right to make things like that, decisions like that. But that's what Raymore wants.
I don't know if that's enough to give you guys any direction, or whether or not it should be a topic of a work session again to better outline direction for staff.
Just kind of based on the comments that were made, I would get a couple of yeses and a 3 no's and let's look at it further, which would be very difficult for staff to go ahead and plug it in based on that particular item. But again, up to and including the last budget meeting, if somebody wants to propose a hard number and plug something in, they can.
Mr. Mayor, I would do precisely that, and and I'm perfectly fine and respectful of the council to vote on this and its merits as a budget item. So I would propose to staff or Mayor Pro Tem and my colleagues that we fund this for up to $2,800 based on the figures that Mr. Adams gave us the other night, which, I don't remember exactly the hard numbers that the lady gave us here about a year ago, but it was around there, for the extra day. So that basically, I'll lay out my intent there is to fund that extra day that Mr. Adams spoke about Monday night, and fund it up to $2,800, and if it's less, then it's less, but, that money would be there available as a budget item. And again, like I say, I'm very comfortable and respectful of the rest of the council to vote on this up or down, at the time of that time.
Jim, can you bring when you bring the budget to us, any recommendations that we have? Can you bring those to us as separate line items, so that we can look at them individually as opposed to the budget as a whole?
We can, and we have in the past. We bring you the overall spreadsheet, what it does to the fund balance. If obviously, if you've given us a unanimous direction sitting at one of the previous work sessions that you wanted included, we drop those in. When we have ones that are a little bit more debatable, we can list them as a separate line item. The council member who wishes to champion it could propose it for at that meeting, a formal vote up or a down, rather than a consensus situation.
Can we have this brought to us as a line item then?
Absolutely.
Councilmember Moorhead.
I have 2 modifications I'd like to propose. The first is, and these are both out of general funds, I would respectfully request, based on a discussion that we had over this last year regarding some of the restructuring in the police department, there was some discussion about with the changes and allowing for promotion, there needs to be inclusion for training. I noticed there's $6,400 existing in the current budget for training, but that's kind of that number stayed fairly static over the last few years, and especially with one of the new proposals with the member of the police department going to Quantico, and that's $4,000. I know that, and we even had a recent discussion about specialization of an officer for different needs. I would ask that we increase the training budget within the police department by $5,000. That's a relatively small amount, but knowing that we have the opportunity for local and regional training. Some of those trainings are not that expensive, but to be able to allow officers to meet those promotional goals and just for the benefit of our officers for specialty training, I'd like to see $5,000 be included. That's the first motion.
Are you asking for a one-time or ongoing, just as a general budget increase?
Well, I'd like it to be ongoing. My assumption is after we implement this first year, we would get impact within the department to see how that was used, and then obviously the recommendation would be up or down from there, depending on the success of the increase.
Councilmember Holman?
I'm certainly in favor of that. I think that's a good idea, especially in today's society. I think you look at recent events, and I think that's certainly going to become a topic out of the Ferguson incident, of many, obviously. My question would be, I'd be kind of interested in hearing from the chief. Training for general officers is going to come at the local level here, probably from the Blue River Academy, where we pay a retainer. Is that the scenario, what we have for just the majority of the officers, chief? Is that correct?
Actually, we terminated our contract with Blue River and moved to Cass County. When the Cass County Academy became post-certified, we moved our training down there. It's actually cheaper and much more accessible to us. So basically the same type of contract where we can get FTO training and supervisor training and that sort of thing.
I guess where I'm going to get with this is if this were approved and you were to receive $5,000, where would you envision spending that? I mean, to me, that would be more beyond local or regional or even outside regional training to utilize that money for additional training. Is that a correct assumption?
We are able to provide the vast majority of our training within the budget that we have. Obviously, as Councilman Moore had pointed out, there are always opportunities regionally for us to send officers to different types of training, but we certainly, with the budget that we have, are doing just fine with the training that we're able to provide. And again, and I know Councilman Holman is very familiar with post and post certification, that we are required within each three-year cycle to provide a certain amount of training to our officers. We go a bit above and beyond that requirement of 48 hours within those 3 years to the extent that we can. So,
but that's at the level of minimum required training. I think what Councilman Moore, and slap me if I'm wrong, but I think he's looking for some specialization beyond what we have right now. Gosh, I'm trying to think of some stuff, maybe bomb and arson training, or I don't know if you send people to DRE training, some things like that aren't a thing you see every day at a local level.
We do, and to your point, when we discussed this during the goal session, the work session, that we do have individuals who are certified in accident reconstruction. We do have individuals that are DRE, and that's drug recognition for those of you who don't know, that are certified in that. Obviously, individuals who receive that specialized updated training in DUI certification and that sort of thing. So yes, we do have a number of specialists, to include our firearms training instructors that we send to the NRA schools for that certification and that sort of thing. So we do have a lot of that specialization already.
Thanks.
Let me ask this. Would it be better then to just create a fund that we set money aside in that would open up to all departments, to whether there's specialized training that, or certifications that everybody or each individual department could apply to every year? That way it's on it's widespread and it's not just relegated to one department. Councilmember Dogon.
At the risk of making enemies of some of my friends that work for the city. Just kidding. I think we need to step back from this. I think that our department heads are quite capable of planning in this budget the amounts that they need for their training. I know for a fact that the police department has excellent trainers on their staff. They're able to train their staff at a minimal cost because of the great leadership that we have in the police department. I think that they all will be thankful that you want to throw some more money at their training, but I think that Chief and other department heads have great plans for training. They've really thought out, I mean, obviously really thought out this budget here. You use the cart before the horse quite often. I think throwing money into training with no particular place to put it is definitely putting the cart before the horse. Like I said, I think nobody's going to want to turn down training, but Chief, I trust that you have planned for training for this year as you plan for everything else in your department. I wonder, are there officers that are being turned down for trainings that they want to go to because of lack of funds? I feel like that's not a concern that I've heard from people in the city, that I want to go to training and there's no money there for me to go to training. So I think we need to step back from this and let our department heads handle their budget and their training because they're quite capable.
All of us we're concerned about what's happening in the eastern part of the state, and we just want to make sure that it doesn't happen here. But it sounds to me like we don't have that as a problem because we have enough training and everything like that. So that is one of the things that I think was driving maybe some of our concern. I don't know if it was yours or not, but would be on mine. But it seems to me that we are well covered on that, so we not necessary at this time.
Well, you know, I know that I personally have never posed the question, but I will ask our only employee that's sitting at the table with us. Are there employees that have been turned down for training or trainings that they have not been able to attend simply because it's not in the budget? I mean, you know, typically those issues would never rise to council level, but, you know, and again, you might have to check with all the department heads.
I would want to check, but I can't think of anything in mind. But I could not speak to if there was some sort of a specialized training that just got kind of brushed aside. You know, it was, wow, this would have been really nice to be able to do, but it's really expensive, so we can't do it, or a tuition type situation. But nothing actually comes to mind where somebody wasn't funded up. And I suppose if it was a really significant issue like that, what I am hearing is that the council would be more than willing to entertain a budget amendment at that time.
Councilmember Moorhead, you brought this forward.
Apparently, I'll withdraw my motion on that. That's the one I wasn't expecting any conflict over, but that's okay. The second motion is in relation to on the general fund regarding the transfer out to park fund. Last year, we increased the amount from $50,000 to $100,000. The purpose given was in relation to future costs related to upkeep and general dealing with issues, say for things like Hawk Ridge Park. This year that money was kind of brought in as kind of an omnibus miscellaneous, you know, pay for things at the end of the year kind of expenditure. I'd like to transfer that to economic development. We had talked about the inclusion of an arts council, use the $50,000 as an initial funding of the Arts Council, and ultimately my hope is the idea that Parks and Economic Development can jointly participate in this to further the Arts Council.
Thoughts?
I don't know if I'd be supporting an Arts Council when we got so much that we really need to spend money on roads and whatnot. I just couldn't support that, sorry.
Councilmember Kellogg, did you?
Yeah, I have no problem with that suggestion. I appreciate it. I think that's a good starting point. And if it doesn't work out, we can always pull that money back and use it somewhere else. So I appreciate the offer and the suggestion and the insight to the future.
And I'd actually be supportive of reducing that amount from 100,000 back to 50,000. especially in light of the fact that it seemed like the money went to undesignated fund balance last year. And if any group is going to have an undesignated fund balance, it truly needs to be the council, because the council looks at the city as a whole and looks at every aspect of the city, whereas the Parks Department is purely focused on, parks and recreation. So if anybody's going to have excess funds to do with as need be, it needs to be somebody who sees it as a whole and not just one particular element. So I'd actually support drawing that back in. I don't know if 50,000, especially in light of us having a work session, or is it next month, talking about the Arts Council?
That's correct.
I think we definitely should withdraw that money back, but not necessarily allocate it until we have that work session.
There was one point I forgot to add to go on to this. This was not designed to be negative toward the parks. According to the CIP, we're dealing with one of the first phases of Hawk Ridge Park in 2017, and I would be supportive of the idea once we get to a point where we're actually physically doing something with Hawk Ridge Park, then the intention of that 50,000 becomes more vested at that point, and I'd agree to increase this amount back up to the 100 at that time. But since we're still at that embryonic phase, that would justify why let's pull that back out and allocate it something more short term, and then we can readdress this when it becomes more relevant.
Sir?
Just to address a couple of the impacts of that, with that particular transfer out, at $100,000, the general fund then surplus that $8,758 that you see at the bottom of the page. This would actually, because it's considered an operating expense of the general fund, it would increase the general fund balance. It wouldn't technically go to economic development, but it would increase the balance within the general fund by the 50,000 to be spent within the general fund rather than the park fund. At the same time, within the park fund, it would mean that the park fund regular budget would be, because they're currently at a zero budget amount, would be at $50,000 deficit, where they would be spending then into their fund balance, which would still technically, as I spoke to the council earlier, would still technically be a balanced budget according to state statute and city code, because they would be spending available fund balance plus no more than their revenue and available fund balance. So it would be within code. It would be a departure from what's been done in the past, where the park board has proposed expenditures to exactly equal revenues.
Could we get rid of the park board's money having to go into the VERP? Because I think they've got like about $102,000, and yet what I have seen over the past few years, their expenses on equipment don't really run that high, and it has to be in a separate account anyway. So couldn't we just eliminate that for the park department, having to have a VERP, since it has to be in a separate account anyway? Can't, because all park funds have to be in a separate account.
The purpose of putting their funds under the park fund into the VERP is so that when that piece of equipment finally gives out, they don't have a spike in that year that kills the rest of their budget. Instead, they have a nice flat amount that they can budget for, plan for. I think it's fiscally prudent for any piece of rolling stock in the city to be, you pay your $50 a year for 5 years, knowing that you're going to have a $250 expense at the 5 year that doesn't spike your budget all of a sudden.
Well, what I was going by was the fact that the state statute says all park funds have to be kept in a separate account, and yet that particular one was in with the joint city account, and so and it's never being accounted for under the park. So I was curious
That's actually why we,
It's not a big deal with me, but it's a curious one.
that's why we actually segregated even within the VERP fund itself.
As I recall, Mr. Fearborn and Mr. Kennedy maybe will help too, but one of the last few meetings that I had on Parks Board, that actually became kind of an issue with, I think, his recommendation for a pickup or something like that, and the VERP, having that money in the VERP fund became kind of vital to actually being able to run the finances properly if we went that route. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
I'm still supportive of reducing that 100,000 down to 50, and then to allocate it later after our work session. Member Stevens.
I'm a little more comfortable with having projects that are defined rather than just throwing money at something. I mean, if they want something specific and everyone agrees, that's fine. But I don't know, what is the $50,000 for exactly? Is it just thrown in there for whatever?
It is for the general support and maintenance of the park fund. That's correct. It is the city of we did some research into this when we first started doing the transfer, and certainly the transfer from the general fund into the park fund, when you compare us with some other cities, is pretty small. And last year, I believe it was Councilmember Westcoat, asked that Mr. Kennedy account for what was going to be done with that 50,000 when it went into there. The increase in the fund balance for the park fund, while it may look like is entirely associated with the revenue going in, there would be some degree of that is being realized because proposed expenditures or projected expenditures were less than what had originally been budgeted. So the argument could be made that yes, while they said they needed the 50,000 for these expenditures, it didn't come in at that amount, but there's no guarantee that those expenditures aren't going to go up or there's not going to be a project associated with it. But it doesn't negate the fact that at the end of the day, there was a $50,000 increase in the fund balance.
Councilmember Moorhead.
I'll actually go back and I concur with Councilmember Westcoat that since we don't actually have an arts council defined in there, let's wait till the work session that we talk about it, see how staff recommends how this gets allocated, and that's how it goes. I understand that the 50,000 will go back into the general fund, but you know, I mean, this does not preclude us, and we have done in the past, when Parks is in need, they come to us with a request, and we can just allocate and fund their project based on need. We know with Hawk Ridge Park, at some point it is going to be a CIP expense, and it will require us to fund that. And so just as we're talking about a civic center, when the need arises, they come before us. So we're not taking anything away from Parks. It just, it's going back to the initial level, and then it's allocating funds, or at least giving the intention of possibly allocating funds to another project. But Parks still has the ability and has come before us for a general fund request.
Councilmember Dogowan.
Sorry, I'm slightly hesitant to support that just because I really am fearful about the council micromanaging parks money. I really think that we don't need to approve all the money that they spend, but at the same time, when we looked at putting this $100,000 into doing this transfer, originally it was because of more operating costs, more parkland, developing more parkland, so we would have to take care of more of our parkland, for example, Hawk Ridge Park. And the Farmers Market Park, but we haven't seen anything happening there really yet. So I guess I'm agreeing with Mr. Moorhead that there really isn't that additional cost for maintaining those properties just yet because we haven't seen anything changing there. We're not taking care of the grass at Hawk Ridge any differently now than we have been in the last 5 years. Same at the Farmers Market Park. We're still caring for that exactly the same, or pretty close to the same as, we haven't seen those changes occurring like I guess I was hoping to see. I think a big part of this has to do with communication. I think over and over the council has said we don't want to throw money at the Parks Department when we don't know what they're going to be spending it on. And while, as I said, I don't want to micromanage, I don't want to have to approve every dollar or every project they're funding. I think it would be helpful for us to be able to see that big amount and at least have some idea what that money is going to go to, because we haven't seen that huge increase in operating cost, and we saw the projects come through to us before that this is what we want to spend that other $50,000 on. Maybe if up front we could see, okay, we have this $100,000 that we're not going to need to spend for mowing or maintenance or whatever, so instead we're going to spend it on this. And I guess maybe I didn't find the right page, but I didn't find that in here, what that money is going to be spent on, and maybe that's part of why Mr. Moorhead's suggesting that we take that money away. Instead of taking that money away, I would like to, I have a lot of people saying, okay, we have this Hawk Ridge Park plan, we have all these plans and parks, but nothing's happening. We're not seeing anything moving forward on this. We've had the Hawk Ridge Park plan for quite some time, and we still don't have an idea what's going to come first, or where we're going to start, or what to expect there. I think that it's important for us to support our Parks Department. I think obviously maybe the holdup is they don't feel like they have money to get anything started. I know that was some frustration that I was hearing for a while. I would love to keep the money in parks, but I'm with Mr. Moorhead. I would like to know what they're spending it on, but without having to approve every project.
And realizing that this was an issue with Councilmember Westcoat last year, where he had asked about the expenditures that were associated with it, I do think that Mr. Kennedy has a list of what the additional $50,000 at least was he had intended for it, or how that gets him to a balanced budget, if it would be okay if you'd want to hear that.
Well,
Thank you. I guess just to start with, if you look at what we're asking for 2015 budget-wise as compared to what we asked for in 2014, we're actually asking for $18,000 less than what we were last year. And that's with the $50,000 included. So if the $50,000 goes away, we're going to take a hit of almost $68,000 to our $1.1 million budget, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's huge to us. It really is. But I can run over this really quickly to kind of tell you where the funds are for the $50,000 for 2015. The first being we're going to spend $11,000 more on personnel costs. And this is strictly for insurance, workman's comp, and the raises that Mr. Fearborn has anticipated for staff. Equipment maintenance, we have a lot of older equipment, and we anticipate again this year of spending $3,000 additional for that equipment. We made a statement last year that we really thought that we needed to do more planting, more landscaping, more trees. And associated with that, we put in funds for part-time personnel to take care of the flower beds, to help us water the trees, to do all the things associated with those things that we've done this year. Vehicle maintenance, we have the oldest fleet in the city, without a doubt. We have 2 vehicles that aren't even listed on the fleet because we can't afford to replace them at this time. So consequently, we have to spend a little more money than what's anticipated in those vehicles to keep them going day in, day out. Special events, if you remember, we spent $5,000 extra on the 4th of July for fireworks. We added an Arts in the Park program, and we added a Touch-a-Truck program. Those 3 things cost about $7,000 for us to add those events and raise the level of, for example, the fireworks for the 4th of July. Part-time recreation, we felt that we needed to have better supervision and more supervision on all our athletic fields and the things out in the parks, the activities and programs and special events. So we put $4,500 into just supervising and having more staff available at these events. We're going to spend, or propose to spend, another $6,000 on replacement of soccer goals. We need more soccer goals because our soccer program is expanding and growing. And finally, baseball and softball, $4,500. And this is just basically to replace equipment, catcher's gear, all the stuff associated, bases, things for the fields and the athletes both. And this is just an ongoing expense because we kind of got behind in our level of equipment and stuff associated. Any questions that anybody has? But just finally, this would have a huge, huge impact on us as far as what we do. And as far as Ms. Dougwatt's question on, we're going to spend $300,000 this year if this additional $150,000 goes in the farmers market area, and that work is all going to be done by the spring time for the opening of the market. We're meeting Monday night on Hawk Ridge Park, and we anticipate that the park board is going to allocate more money out of the park sales tax fund and our reserve fund to use towards capital projects in Hawk Ridge. They want to start now. They do not want to wait till 2017 or 2018 to do improvements to Hawk Ridge Park. So that's not only going to cost money up front, but also the maintenance and care once those things are done. Thank you.
If that's the case, and they want to go ahead and spend the money now, or just like if the Parks Department needs vehicles, there's a $300,000 undesignated fund balance, which is basically $300,000 in cash that's sitting there for discretionary spending. If the Parks Department is in need, why aren't they spending their undesignated fund balance? I guess
They're going to spend it on Hawk Ridge Park.
Well, but the challenge with it is that they're saying that they don't have money to do this, they don't have money to do this, they don't have money to do this, and yet there's $300,000 that's sitting there to do that thing, to do just that. You know, in 2011 there was $300,000, then there was $317,000, then our adopted one was $261, but it ended up being $303. Now it's $307. You know, I guess my fundamental issue is we're transferring money in, and we're told that it's needed and that they need to spend it, and yet the undesignated fund balance, the money that's not being spent, grows year after year after year. If the Parks Department needs a new vehicle, they've got $300,000. You know, unless they're going to buy a Ferrari, there's money in a budget for it, and I don't get it.
Those are questions we should ask the board, not the director, but the board, because they're the ones that make the final decision. And when we meet Monday night, we should have some serious questions for the board.
I agree, but it's the director who's proposing the budget, and this is a budget discussion.
But they had to approve it.
They can't do anything with $100,000. I mean, if you look at, they could buy a vehicle, sure, but any improvement to the park, and we see that with the Civic Center. You know, you have to save your money and save your money and save your money for something like that. None of the park projects are $100,000, which is why I think we shouldn't take the money out. We just heard what they're spending it on. That's basic, everyday costs, improvements that are needed, and at the same time, they're moving on the farmers market. They're moving on Hawk Ridge Park. I think that we need this information. We need you to tell us the details. I think, you know, in the summary here, transfer for general fund, it would have been nice to have a little bit more information on those things he just told us. Maybe that's where the problem is again in communication.
Councilmember Kellogg.
And I would agree with that. In the past, you know, years past, back when Ms. Schnucka was here, I remember one instance where they foregone, you know, 1 year so that they could carry that balance over for a future project. You may have been on the park board at that time, I can't remember. But, you know, I think it would be helpful for us as a council to be refreshed and reviewed as to, you know, the justification for that $300,000. Because, yes, I agree. I mean, if it's unreserved and it's, you know, it's just sitting there, you know, and they're not spending it, then why would we give them more? This also brings into the topic of the 20% out of the tax levy that, that we make the 50-50 division on, So I would like to have a refresher review from the Parks Board, our Parks Director, as to, what is going on there, because I may not be completely clear as to what all has transpired. There's so much going on with the Hawkridge Park, with the golf, the disc golf. I mean, there's so much going on in the parks that, I for myself, and I'm not trying to speak for anybody else here, but I for myself sometimes get overloaded with all these different programs and they get cross-wired and all of that, so it'd be good.
The other thing I'd like to point out is that, last year the council, and I'll get you in just a second. Last year we designated $1 million out of our undesignated fund balance, and we put it for a civic center. So we encumbered it, we earmarked it, so it's no longer in our undesignated fund balance. The park board has that same ability to say, okay, here's $300,000. Well, if you're talking to somebody who's looking at your budget and is scrutinizing your budget, you need to either encumber that and get it off of your undesignated fund balance, because when I see that we're making an extra $50,000 transfer and what we were originally told why it was being made wasn't used for that, and then it looks like you've just banked it, that tells me that something's going on that doesn't set well with me. Either earmark it for a project, get it off there, but when it sits as undesignated fund balance, that's irresponsible. Councilmember Moorhead.
Thank you. I have 3 questions regarding the Park and Rec breakdown on page 127. First of all, I'm questioning what is the $20,150 increase to maintenance and repairs under expenditures parks? Is that related to, Mr. Kennedy, to what you were talking about with some of the additional costs and upkeep? The other thing is there was numerous mentions of increases in personnel costs, but yet under the proposed budget from last year to this year, there's a net decrease between the two, so we have no increase in that. And then, as Mr. Westcoat brings up, the $300,000 fund balance, but actually looking at last year's adopted to this year, there's a $38,000 increase to that. So we're not just talking about spending it, but the $50,000 we put in, $38,000 of that is just actually just going into the kitty. These were not rhetorical questions. I'm more than happy, Mr. Kennedy, go ahead and help me understand that.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, we're here to talk about the city's budget, and that is, the park department is a part of the city's budget, but it is a separate part. The questions that we're asking now should be asked Monday night to the board.
Except $100,000 of the city's budget actually goes to there.
Okay.
So we have full purview over that $100,000.
Respectfully, actually, Councilmember Kubach, I actually had the floor in a question to the Parks
Director. How are they
Director.
reimbursed for the buildings and grounds?
So I actually had the floor and had an open question to be answered, please.
Councilman Moorhead, would you ask your first question again, please?
Was the explanation of the increased maintenance and repairs to equipment and existing things, is that what the $20,150 increase was between last year's adopted budget and this year's proposed?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's specifically designated towards the equipment that we currently have and making sure that it operates in a proper manner and gets the work done to it. As that equipment gets a little older, it just takes more time, more parts, and more labor to make sure that it runs and runs correctly.
Okay. And the second question was related to personnel. You had mentioned that you had increased costs hiring between either seasonal people or just increased internal costs. I think you mentioned healthcare, different things like that. But yet, between the two personnel expenses, that's a net decrease. So, why is the budget reflect a decrease?
I'm going to let John McLean address that if he would specifically. I think I know, but I want to hear what John has to say, if that's all right, sir.
We did an increase with the site supervisor position with the increase of programs. That was a $4,500 increase that we took into consideration. I'm not sure where the decreases were. I know I proposed an increase for $4,500, so that way during all of our rental tournaments that we had, that somebody would be there on site all the time. Somebody from city staff would be there in case of emergency, in case of any issues. We did see an increase in our rental revenue, so that helps to offset that as well. I know that for a fact, and we are, versus proposed versus what we actually did this year, we're ahead of the game. So that's a good thing, but we do have that proposal in there for staff. We did ask for some of those funds from that $50,000 to be the offsetting for the healthcare and those issues. I do not plug in all those numbers, so with that being said, when it comes to the personnel aspect, that is something that Ms. Watson puts in once she gets the numbers from HR. So I know I put in for an increase. The bottom line for the recreation division, I do see what you're talking about as in the current versus proposed, though we did drop that down. So the proposed for the end of this year is actually still less than what we're asking for next year. So there's still an increase there.
If I could address some of the personnel numbers, sir. Thank you. What you will note from the chart, it's important to take a look at how we actually ended last year. You'll remember that in the middle of the year, we lost some park personnel. So what you see in here is, and then when we bring on new personnel, we don't necessarily bring them on at the same salary nor the same benefit structure, so there can be some cost savings. So what you see within personnel for parks is we had budgeted $403,198, but we actually anticipate ending the year at $394,380, and there is just a very slight increase over where we think we're actually going to end of $396,086. Same thing down in recreation. We actually ended up at 311, and we're anticipating a very slight increase to 315. It's only 6,000, but over what we actually spent, we're actually anticipating a net increase in personnel costs.
And as to my third question, actually, I apologize, that was somewhat rhetorical. The thing I'm trying to make gets back to the general request, which is, you know, in economics, we use a phrase called Parkinson's principle, which is if you got it, you're going to spend it. And if you make more money, you spend more money. And it's amazing how we spend what we make, and regardless if we go up or down. And the one thing I want to prevent here is I have no problem with us giving money to the parks, especially with the development of Hawk Ridge Park. But I want it to be in conjunction with that. Remember, last year it was discussed that this was going in for the purpose of helping with as we get into Hawk Ridge Park, but then we never did. And then, you know, I understand that there's an expectation that will occur this year. And if that is brought before me, I'm going to support that and any increase that relates to that. But I want to make sure those kind of go hand in hand. Since that's not right now before us and it is being expected, although I just learned that this morning, since we had put in our goals and objectives and had already docketed something for the Arts Council, that was the purpose, to take that money short term, move it over for that purpose. So I'm still kind of back to the let's remove it for the time being, and then we put it in as the need may requires.
Is there any other discussion on that particular issue? Councilmember Dugwad.
I just want to say I disagree. I think we need to leave that in there. I think Mr. Kennedy talked on several different points. I think that he said they're meeting tomorrow night, so we're going to be able to look at this budget a few more times before we approve it. They're meeting tomorrow night,
Yes.
or Monday night,
Monday night.
to talk about what their plan is for Hawk Ridge. I'd really like to hear that before we take the money away. And again, provide that expectation for better communication. I would vote to leave it in.
Can we have that as a line item as well, to remove it?
Very good, sir.
Thank you.
We're gonna meet with the park board Monday.
Correct.
And we need to, all these questions that we have asked the staff, we need to ask the board, because they're the ultimate ones who made the decision. The staff may have recommended do certain things, but the board had to agree to do it, and we need to find out why the board agreed to do what they did.
Fair enough. We still have $1.5 million of undesignated fund balance. I'd actually like to propose that we actually pre-fund our road construction project and move $750,000 of it into a earmarked fund to bring up that level of construction to the $800,000 to hit our the $800,000 budget, which is the slide 3. Councilmember Kellogg.
I appreciate the suggestion, but what I'm kind of cautious about is what's already been said here, and it's been said many times over the past several months, even years, you know, with the Economic Development Department trying to develop the business park down on the south end of Dean. You know, it's not that I want to, you know, tag that unreserved fund balance for a project that takes a road to hopefully someday somewhere, but you know, I'm worried that if we take too much out of there and something does come up, that we won't be in the position to fund something like that prudently. Yeah, you know, I'll admit so that, you know, it might be a pipe dream of inside of Kevin's head, but you know, I never say never, and I never rule out the possibility of hope and prospects, because I know that community development is working extremely hard on that area down there, and that's one thing that is definitely in my concerns, is that area. And if we need to, as a council, fund something like that, I definitely want to be in the financially standing that we are able to, you know, at least partially fund it, you know.
Well, keep in mind, we can set it up the same way that we set up the money that the transfer that we made for the Civic Center. You know, we allocated the money for it, but if the council needs that money for some other project, we still have the ability to pull that out. The $750,000 would be set aside, and then $150,000 of it would be pulled out every year to augment that budget to the $800,000 level. So the first year, only $150,000 of it would be there. So the money would still be available if that project were to come up. Again, it's just earmarked. My personal take is to have, when you have undesignated fund balances that are generated from taxpayers, to me, that's irresponsible, and that's just my take. And that's why if we have it allocated for the projects, to me, it's a more responsible way to do it. Councilmember Dugwad.
You mentioned that we're nearing the end of the sidewalk program. What year does that actually finish? Do you happen to know that?
We have actually dropped it off at the end of 17-18. Mike believes we will have covered all of them by then. So the 5th year of your CIP has no money designated for the sidewalk program.
So I'm wondering if that money is almost that 150 that we would need to increase that. So do we really need to look at doing this for 5 years, or would it make more sense to do it for less than 5 years?
What, did you say that that was in the 5th year that it actually drops off?
Yes, in 2018, 2019.
So by the time that it actually drops off, if we do it this way, we'd actually have it pre-funded by that amount. So by the time that the sidewalks would actually drop off, that we could allocate that money, we'd almost be through the entire project, and our roads would be at 86% fair or above. Councilmember Moorhead.
I'm supportive of the general proposal. I'm not sure about the dollar amount, because based on what Councilmember Abdelgawad said, we're really looking at 4 years instead of 5, 750. Now maybe it's 600. I mean, but I do have to say, I mean, you know, the reason why this was brought up in a work session, the reason why we spent some time talking with the city manager, talking about why the justification for the increase, is the fact that we need better roads. We see the value of what, you know, when Public Works talked to us about, you know, putting a little extra money in, look at what you get for what you pay for. And so therefore, you know, I think the recommendation by Councilmember Westcoat's sound. I don't know the exact dollar amount, whether you'd move it to 600 and then we go to the sidewalk money or whatever. It's not that big of a deal to me, but I think we should support allocating some to that. I mean, you know, we've seen some value that I agree. You don't, I mean, it's bad business to run with all that cash in the wallet. And the fact that we have needs, the fact that we can spend this money that would lower our debts later and it would be more efficiently used now, I think that, and, you know, and Councilmember Hubach has been saying, let's get these roads fixed. So, you know, I think that some allocation of some amount, it makes perfect sense.
Councilmember Holman.
I support the concept as well. I think it's been identified on our annual survey for a number of years that that's obviously one of the most important topics to our citizens. So I think it's a fairly sound decision. Again, I think maybe there's probably some wiggle room for the intricacies of that as to whether it's 600,000 we fund it for 3 or 4, or whether we meld part of that into sidewalks. But I think it's certainly a good proposal. I do have a question though, just and I agree with your comment too, that I think we should look at utilizing some of our what's the term again? That's what he said. There you go. Undesignated fund balance. Mr. Furborn, can you give us just an example for comparison? If we were to bump up our employees are enrolled in the loggers retirement plan, correct? Mm-hmm. If we were to bump that up by we're at 1.5, is that correct? As far as the multiplier for retirement?
That's correct.
And if we were to bump that up, say 0.25%, what would the cost be to the city on that? Or is that a reasonable question to ask?
Hang on just one second.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
It's in my personnel pile. Part of the issue with that, the front end issue with it is that is a recurring cost item. So you will,
I see.
what you're committing to is every single year dropping that fund balance, dropping that fund balance. It's one of the things that's dangerous, to use fund balance for recurring cost. However, several years ago there was a proposal brought forward, and we flippantly call it the Liberty proposal relative to loggers, because Liberty actually adopted it. And the city is currently on an L7 program, which means the formulary within the within the formula percentage amount that applies to your years of service is 1.5%. The proposal that had come forward, some of you may remember, is that we go from an L7 program to an L6 program. An L6 program increases the formulary by 0.5% from 1.5 to 2 for the payout. it's retroactive. It doesn't occur to the employee when that happens, which means there is an actuarial liability amount that you have to pay those back years for. It is often proposed to be done in conjunction with the employees going to a full contributory amount, which means 4% gets lopped off the gross that the employees have been making, and they begin to contribute to that. Even if you go to an employee contributory amount, when you shift from it, you're going to increase the actual city costs over what you're paying. You do not decrease the city's costs because you're paying for those back years that your employees have been working. Back then, we estimated that the city's annual cost would increase from about $615,000 that we pay. It would increase by about $15,000. Not a lot, but you also have to remember that the city, that our employees are going to get hit with a 4% lug. The reason it's called the Liberty Proposal, our average employee age is 44, which means if you're a police officer, you're 11 years from retirement. If you're a general employee, you are 16 years from retirement, or from even being able to consider retirement under the logger system. We do not have the rule of 80. And a lot of our employees are well under that average 44 year of age. They're 22 and 23-year-old police officers in the system. What happened in Liberty is a program that they thought would be great to propose. They ended up with a lot of young police officers and their families gathered at the council meeting, and there were actually some wives who were crying, saying, you know, my husband or my wife isn't even going to be here in 40 years when we could take advantage of this, but what you're telling me is you're going to take 4% of the gross salary that I need to put food on the table right now. And it didn't go over as well as they thought. It did pass, barely, but they made as many employees angry as they rewarded in the system. Just facts.
Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Moorhead.
Back on Councilmember Westcote's proposal of the 750,000, I would almost challenge, can we get a more definitive number or a modified number? Because I would subsequently hope to make a motion to include, I was going to propose 300,000 to go toward the Civic Center Fund, but if you're going to propose 750, I'm disinclined to dip into the undesignated that much. If you reduced yours to a 5 or 6 number, then we would still leave a safe cushion in there based on my belief. But so are you firm on the 750?
I arrived at the 750 by just doing, you know, that we had 5 years to reach the 2020 mark, and we had 650 budgeted, which was a $150,000 difference over the 5 years. So I'm flexible. That was just the initial proposal, you know, especially since I do have a soft spot for the Civic Center. Councilmember Abdel Gawad.
I need a flashing light. Just curious, and I don't know, we may have talked about this in the meeting when we talked about roads. Would it have any better of an effect, or is it even a reasonable thought to think about, instead of stretching this money out over 4 years, to drop more money in right up front? If we've got the money sitting there right now, is that even something possible? What effect would that have? Would that work better, work worse? Just some thoughts, since we have the money.
Mr. Crass?
If you recall, when we modeled the infusion of dollars that we're going to be spending in next year in 2015, it did bring the network up back to there weren't any poor roads, but because because the funding level after that doesn't meet the total maintenance needs, that pie chart continues to rotate. And so there's always roads that are on the cusp that are falling off into the next category. And so that, again, we're in the same situation. If you wait and then do a big infusion of cash, that's why we went to the modified method of just allocating based on each year's review of the network dollars to those type of reconstruction activities, and still doing the routine maintenance activities.
Sorry. So stretching it out over 5 years, 4 years would be the best way to do it? That's my question. Is stretching it out the better way to do it, or dropping the money up front the better way to do it? Just in your opinion, you know way more about it than I do.
I don't think it's significantly to the network, and I don't think it makes that much difference.
If I could add add two questions to Mike. Mike, how much can we do reasonably a year, dollar amount wise?
I think the 800,000 is doable. I mean, we would have to modify how we bring things forward to council, and based on our 5-year road plan, I would really want to get things out to bid in January so we can start in May when everything opens. So it's a little bit of a timing issue to get things in front of council for the programming, but it's workable.
My second question would be, if we stretch it out, is there an advantage to it in that it allows the pavement management system, grading system, to work better to address streets that may have dropped off suddenly without us realizing it? Or is that pretty set in stone for a 5-year period?
I think it's pretty set in stone until we have an opportunity to look at it all at the network level. That we're always going to have, there's always the potential that if we get a rough winter and we have a rough, hard freeze-thaw winter like we did the past couple of years, we're going to end up with the roads like Southwind that have totally deteriorated, that need to be worked in. You're seeing examples of that on Lucy Webb, what you just talked about, all the roughness. There's always the potential that we're going to get 1 or 2 catastrophic ones that don't show up on the modeling. But for the most part, it's pretty well set, and the program will be pretty well set until we get around to another analysis of the whole network.
Councilmember Holman?
Given what Councilmember Moorhead said, I would be in support of kind of a compromise or split of, say, roughly 300,000 into the fund balance for the Civic Center, with, say, 500,000 set aside for the road projects. That drops us from 150 a year to 100,000 a year. I think we could get quite a bit accomplished with both of those, and it raises our fund balance for the Civic Center to an even 1.5. It's a pretty good head start on that project as well.
I would agree to modify my proposal to meet that. Councilmember Delaware?
If we add in the 150 for 4 years, that's 620. The difference between the sidewalks, which is 117, and the 150 would be another 33. So 653 would fund that 150 for 5 years, right? $620. 150 times 4 would be 620. 600, sorry that you're in the wrong spot. So 633, you're right. So that would get 5 years there with the sidewalk, unless is the sidewalk
If we
plan to go somewhere else in 5 years.
If we designated the 117 for the sidewalk to the 150 for that final year, yes, that would get you 5 years.
So
Is that 117 kind of already planned to go somewhere else?
No.
Okay.
So if we put 630 in and 300, that would take 1.5 million into the Civic Center, and that would still leave us a fund balance of, yeah, s- I'm supportive.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Yes.
Cindy, are you keeping up with this? Okay.
You
I
all
see-
have
I
already
see
made
review of a
decision
video
there
in our
before
future.
you've ever heard the proposal or anything like that?
There's been no decision made.
But we're wanting to increase the amount of money, so obviously there's a form of a decision being made.
I'm not following you.
Some of these things we need to wait till we see what we decide.
Well, I think what we're doing now, there are members of council who feel that having undesignated fund balance is inappropriate. Because basically, it's a taxpayer-funded slush fund. So what's happening now is that is being spent down or allocated for whatever projects. So Mr. Moorhead made the recommendation to put extra money in to the Civic Center. Granted, if that project doesn't happen, then that money is reallocated into a different project.
It was always my understanding on a designated fund for the city was to allow for emergencies. And you're saying that we want to put all of this money in, and then if an emergency comes, we take it from that fund. Is that right? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Moorhead?
That's actually, yes, but that was also what we discussed last year when we put the initial 1 million in there, that it was, that if an emergency arose, there was an expectation it could be tapped into to pull it back. And if we don't do the Civic Center, we have Hawk Ridge Park, we have other projects that, basically this is what I would call a physical plant fund to fund whatever we ultimately put in line first, most important to save a tax increase or a tax request to the voters, because the money was already there.
And our undesignated fund balance is on top of the 20% reserves that the city maintains for emergency purposes. So this is, we maintain 20% because that's required by law. This is on top of that excess funds. Councilmember Dugwall, did you have a question?
I was just going to say that the council's been setting money aside for an activity center or a civic center since 2011, so I don't feel that it's inappropriate for us to do that again.
I think you ought to start putting money aside for a new city hall. Because this building here will be the municipal court and the police department. Because when we built it, that's what we said, it's going to either be police and the city, and the time would come when we'd move the police out. Well, instead, we've remodeled to where it's perfect for the police, so it's time to consider moving the city out in 10, 15 years. Because obviously, well, this is just temporary, these filing cabinets here, but we really and truly need to think about an enlarged city hall and where we would put it. And that's something else on that, and even talking about the community center. Where it's gonna go will probably decide the fate of whether it goes in or not.
Are there any other proposals? Well, I have one final one. Since the Parks Department is doing the renovation on 2 of the baseball fields, I would actually recommend, I'm gonna flip back to it, doing the irrigation system as well. It was $100,000. If we're gonna improve 2 of the fields, we might as well go ahead and put the irrigation system in, especially if they're gonna use it to draw tournaments.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, catch us up here on that. So you're saying 2 of the fields have already been done?
No, they're actually budgeted to be done in the CIP, the backstops and some of the other like the sunshades, things of that nature. In one of the unfunded projects was to put irrigation on all the fields, to go ahead and bring those up to a safe level. I guess there's a safety concern with part of the turf field, and then actually just to improve the appearance.
If I could have John talk about the scheduling on those.
Thank you. Like Mr. Fearborn said earlier, we had $75,000 in this year and anticipate $75,000 in the budget for next year. And we thought there'd be some cost savings by, excuse me, doing those two fields together in the amount of $150,000, plus also the fact that it would not have the impact of having four fields tore up over 4 years, possibly just having 2 fields for 2 years. So that is kind of the goal, I think, on that project.
So as a follow-up question to that, so right now, the 75,000 takes care of one field per year. What if we, Councilmember Westcoat, what if we modified your increase to the 150 to do the 2-year? Would that be more beneficial instead of just a blanket 100, or go to the 250 or 150?
Well, that's two different projects, because the 75,000 for each field includes backstops and fencing, dugouts, and has nothing to do with irrigation. Is that what you're asking, sir?
I did get confused. I'm sorry about that. I thought that you were speaking to the 100,000. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was reading the notes.
That's all right. I know you're trying to do two things at once. In my opinion, because that irrigation project is actually one that was pushed way back into the unfunded projects by staff, that tells me that it's not something that they found was that important to even have on the list to be funded in the next few years. If we want to give that money for parks improvement, I think it would make more sense to put it into one of the ones that our city staff actually found is important enough to put into the next 5 years, like improvements at Memorial Park, the tennis court maintenance at Memorial Park, or even the ADA access and playground improvements at Memorial Park.
With your okay, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, maybe John could address, having spoken to the park board on these, if they would have a priority on any of those, or?
The tennis courts, if you remember, the 4 courts at Recreation Park are going to have to be crack filled and painted again. And what the park board has suggested, and staff has wholeheartedly agreed, is again for cost savings to do a budget amendment, bring it to the park board and eventually to the council to go ahead and do all 6 tennis courts, the 2 at Memorial Park and the 4 out at Recreation Park. And we anticipate that's going to be probably somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 to crack fill and color coat those courts. That's part of that $300,000 balance that currently is in the capital funds for park improvements. Now, as far as other work, the park board was not sure how the $150,000 that is in the budget would be designated for the farmers market area. So they kind of held back with some of that $300,000 because they figure that, or they think that that is a definite priority, is to get the first phase completed in the farmers market area. And also, I think they are going to try to, like I said, do something in Hawk Ridge Park, because they do feel, as many of you do, that we've had the park since 2008. We finished the master plan this past spring. It's time to do something to make a showing in that park. And then there's always the dog park that's hanging out there too, that there has been discussion amongst the park board that they might want to pursue that. So I know I kind of went a little further than you asked, but that's why that $300,000 is there, sir, is so they could address some of those things as the budget is a little more well-defined. Thank you.
I actually withdraw my motion.
So, Mr. Kennedy, I guess I understood that question differently than you. My question was, looking at the unfunded projects in the capital improvement plan, the ones funded beyond 2015, including Memorial Park improvements, Memorial Park tennis court maintenance, Recreation Park baseball fields renovation project, that on page 220 of our packet, which ones of those would the park board prioritize as wanting to do first?
The tennis courts are definitely on the top of the list, and that's due to the fact we have to do something with the recreation park courts. And since Memorial had already been identified, they just included that. So that's probably number one.
And if I could add on to that, you'll remember the recreation park tennis courts were going to have to come to the city council as a budget amendment. And I think it was the park board's intention, not to speak for John, I think it was the park board's intention to say, so that we can realize some economies of scale, when we bring the budget amendment to the park sales tax fund to get the recreation park courts fixed, we'll go ahead and accelerate the Memorial Park tennis courts into this year, was what.
That is correct, sir. The next priority has not been specifically identified by the park board, but I believe, even though it's not listed in those unfunded items, I would say Hawk Ridge Park would be the next item that they would like to see some development in, whether that's just a trail or possibly a dog park. It is dependent upon what they decide at Monday night's meeting, I believe.
Just to follow up, does staff have clear direction regarding the street and the civic center adjustments to budget?
Yes, we do. I was going to make one other request. Because the $200,000 is sitting in the capital improvement sales tax fund, it would be staff's recommendation and request that money be, that basically we consolidate all of that into the restricted revenue fund, which would show a budget amendment from the capital improvement fund over into the restricted revenue fund of that $200,000. Then $300,000 would be transferred from the general fund into the restricted revenue fund for the same thing, all one line item, future civic center. And $633,000 would be transferred from the general fund balance into the restricted revenue fund to be used over a 5-year period, $150,000 each year, to be added to the transportation fund balance. And you would see that transfer in each year. The reason we would not put it into the transportation fund is the aforementioned discussion that if anything did go wrong, we could always transfer it back.
Very good. Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Holman.
I think while all these projects are certainly worthwhile, if we're going to move some money out of the, am I saying undesignated fund balance? Let's just make sure I get the wording correct. I would like to see it go to something that the public is going to visually see as new. I think that's been one of the complaints. Ms. Abdel-Gawad mentioned this earlier. Therefore, my recommendation would be either some seed money to get something immediately started in Hawk Ridge Park or complete replacement of the park house. We haven't talked about that for a while. I know that Steve gave us a presentation on that right before I left Parks Board. It is used considerably. I don't know exactly what type of cost we'd be looking at, but one of those two things would certainly put a new face on our parks that people would see. We could show them how their money's being spent. Granted, the tennis court's going to have to be taken care of, some of those other issues. The problem from a public perception standpoint is people don't see when we redo the tennis courts. We have to do it, but that's not something that people other than the tennis players see. High school tennis players, people that play for recreation, and us. Playground equipment at Hawk Ridge Park going to be seen. It's going to be a big visible project, and people are going to feel, I think, in general, that we're making larger strides towards our goals.
I think that some of that might be realized when we start talking about an arts commission, public art, how much we'll be able to give you a clear picture of where the fund balances are in September when we meet. That I see the back end of that as being definitely a budget discussion again. And in fact, with the council's okay, we would like to, for every upcoming work session that you're having, have an agenda item at the end of the agenda that is budget discussion, so that we can just keep this going, and we've committed to times, whether you need it or not, but it's at least on the agenda, so people know we might be discussing something. That would be some of the new items. I would also, you are plugging in, if you go forward with this, you are plugging in $1.5 million for something that's pretty big that people are going to be able to see.
Is there any other discussion? Do you have anything for? Oh,
We mentioned Art Council. Also in our goals was trees and beautification. And all three of those were to have citizen input on it. So we need to start thinking about what we want to do on that. If we're going to combine them all into one citizen group, or if we want to have three separate ones, or what we want to do. We already have a tree board. Do we want to enlarge it to include beautification? Or how will beautification and Arts Council interact with each other? I mean, there's several. It's not as clear cut as to say we're going to have an Art Council, and we're going to have a beautification, and we're going to have a tree. We need to figure out how to best utilize the efforts of the people and the use of our money.
I think that's a great topic for our work session in the future. So, well, if there are no other budget conversations, I want to thank staff for being here on a Saturday morning. And
thanks for the excellent budget as usual. And all of
Absolutely.
your thought and effort and time put into it before it comes to us.
with that, I think we stand adjourned.